name is Chief Connie Lazar. Grand Chief Benedict was unable to attend today. He sends his regrets. First of all, I'd like to thank Joyce and her staff from the Department of Justice for hosting this forum. I think that it's an excellent experiment that we're going to have here today by offering what we do in our Justice Department as far as restorative justice to other First Nations. I think that we can only grow as First Nations people when we share our knowledge and our experiences. So I look forward to what we come out of the next couple of days, and I hope that your experience with Akwesasne goes well.
I'm an Anishinaabe police on Manitoulin Island, and I'm currently the Chief of Police. It's great to be here, thanks.
Sandy Jocko, I'm from Fishwater First Nation. I work for United Chiefs and Councils of Donaldson.
I'm Tina Thompson. I'm from Manitoulin Island. I work with the CCMM.
Hi, I'm Chief Dean Roy of Shishiwani First Nation.
Hello, Roseanne Marble, Curve Lake First Nation. I'm the Nino at Central East Cartoon Center, Lindsay.
Bonnie, I'm Rebecca Lukes. I'm from Curve Lake First Nation, and I'm just here traveling with Roseanne.
My name is Paulette Luce, and I come from Sagamik, and I work with the Community Justice Program in our community, and I'm a member of the committee.
Pauline Luce, I'm from Sagamik, and I also work with the Justice Program, and we also do the Diversion Program in our community.
Good morning, my name is Rolando Aguilera. I am legal counsel with the Indigenous Justice Division in the Ministry of the Attorney General.
My name is Tom Hare. I'm here on behalf of my chief with the Chilean First Nation.
Honey, I'm Susan Hare. I'm a lawyer, Manitoulin Island. I have the opportunity to assist the United Chiefs and Councils of Manitoulin to set up Indigenous Court of Justice.
Ani, my name is Leanna Farr. I'm from Tamagami First Nation, and I'm legal counsel with the Anishinaabe Nation Union of Ontario Indians. What?
Quick, Muscatine, the Mayor of Anishinaabe. My name is Virginia McKenzie, and I'm the chair for our Police Service Board. And also, I live on Bear Island, like Tamagami, and we're developing a restorative justice system there. So I'm excited to be here, and Chini Gwitch to the ones that have hosted it, and that Gwitch home.
Thomas Bill from Tamagami First Nations. I'm a constable there, police.
I'm Christine Zachary Dion. I'm one of the chiefs of the elected Mohawk Council Ganawaga, and I hold the portfolio for justice.
My name is Danny Gaspé. I'm from Penisindagi, and I've been asked to help in producing the written report that comes out of this meeting.
Sego, my name is Kiri Ransom. I am a legislative drafter. I'm currently on an education leave from the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, attending Cornell University in Communications. I facilitate legislative drafting and coordinating a lot of the files that have come out of the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne's Justice Department.
Good morning. I'm really glad for everyone who could make it here today. It's true, we can't tell the weather to be at bay for a little while. My name is Joyce King. My Mohawk name is Diganawiaks. I'm the director of the Akwesasne Justice Department. I really welcome you. I'm very glad you're here and that we can make it work for us as First Nations people to look at traditional practices and find those restorative justice principles and implement that into the legislative development or our courts or our enforcement powers in order to make this work for our communities. That's what I'm hoping we will do for this forum. And we're also going to give you the toolkits and I'll talk more as we go on. So welcome again, and glad to see you.
Good morning, I'm Bonnie Cole. I'm legal counsel for the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. I'm also the prosecutor in our Akwesasne court. I'm originally from Birch Island, small community, some of you know it, in Northern Ontario, near Manitoulin Island, but I've been here in Akwesasne for forever. And, you know, I really, and really love this community, and I'm really proud of all the achievements that this community is. It's just so great working here, and I'm really happy to see that you've made it here for this forum. I think that we have a lot to offer, and you have a lot to share as well. So, you know, I think despite everything, despite the weather, despite everything, I think this is meant to unfold the way it's supposed to. So, I just say welcome.
Hi, my name is Gilbert Torrance. I'm the court administrator, and I work under the Justice Department. And I'm looking forward to sharing all the knowledge that we have, and also looking for the feedback from you people as well. And hopefully we can understand where we can help each other out. Thanks.
Good morning, it's Chief Tim Thompson with the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. I have the portfolio for Department of Community and Social Services, and I've been in politics for going on 19 years with our Mohawk Council and our community. So, Yawa, and thank you all for coming, and have a great week here.
So there you go, my name is Lohi O'Connor Jacobs. I work for the Compliance Department for the Justice Department.
Dylan Clue, I work for Compliance for Justice.
Good morning, my name is Taylor Mitchell, and I'm the Conservation Officer for the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. Hi, Chief Robert Patton from Ganawage. I was a police officer for 24 years. This is my second term on council, and my portfolio is public safety and justice and Receipts Act review.
My name is Brian David. I work up in Ottawa as a NILO. I have a colleague here, but I work at the Ottawa Carlton Detention Center. My work is more or less as a cultural, spiritual coach for the boys that are up there, the youth boys. But I also work for the Akwesasne Justice Department, and I've been around the community for some time. It's an honor and a privilege to be caught between my two cousins, Dick on my right, and Tommy that's going to be coming in soon on my left. The two spiritual powerhouses for this community. It's an honor to speak in their presence.
Second, I'd like to tell the people that are here, say, welcome to Mohawk Nation territory, Akwesasne. The thing that I do for my people, I was at the age of 26, when one of the old people that we had, his name was Paul David. He was the one that was in charge of our wampum here in Akwesasne, who passed away, and nobody stepped up for a couple years to take that position. So the people here asked me, they said, do the work that he used to do. That means working with the Confederacy. I told them, I said, I don't know nothing. They said, well, we will help. Learn as you go. So that meant going to all the conventions that they have in the fall. They call it Gully Wheel. I went the first 3 years, I didn't understand anything that was going on. Then, all of a sudden, it just come. I started to pick up the Onondaga language. I start to pick up Cayugi and Seneca. Today, I understand all the languages that guys that I work with. And throughout the years, I sat in council. I was never a condo chief, but when a chief would get sick or passed away, I hold that position. They call him Dionet. My mother had a man named Louis Thompson in that position, and when he passed by, nobody took over. So I sit in council and work with Ernest David and Howard. Howard holds the position out of that goal. Ernest holds the position of Saladova. Those are the three that take care of the wolf clan. So I kind of hold a couple positions. I try to help the people the best that I can in a community. So, and I'm able to conduct funerals of our people, able to conduct weddings too. All the things that I have learned throughout the years, mostly busy all the time, taking things for the younger people, so our knowledge will keep moving. So those are the things that I carry on. First chief of the Mohawk Nation accepted the peace, power, and righteousness, which was what they called the Galiwoga. The Galiwoga accepted that, and then what happened was the peacemaker told them, you go back to your people and tell them that the good mind is coming. And he went and traveled through the woods, and he found a village, and he made a squire there. And in 10 days, they called that Wabuya Polodunkia. Whenever you approach a settlement, you stay on the outside of the reserve, or wherever a community is, and you make a fire. They see the smoke, and then people see it, and they come after him. The first time they approached him, the peacemaker, he wouldn't say a word. So the runner went back to their leader. And he'd say, we talked to this man, but all he does is sit there and smoke his pipe. The leader said, well, this is what we'll do. He took an eagle feather and cut it into little pieces, like a lump. He said, can you tell him, this is my word, the head man, and this will lead into our community. So the runners went back. They told us, our man, the leader of our community, wants you to come and deliver the message. They've been hearing about this good message that you're bringing, a good mind. So the peacemaker goes there, and they welcome him, and he tells about this message that he's going to bring to the people. So that was the time of when they had war chiefs and warriors. That's what the leader was about. So when he told them, and he changed their way, and they became Hudian, a chief, a peace chief. There was one guy, he said, I've still got a little bit of doubts in my mind. If we were to put our weapons down, the other nations would come. We would not have nothing left to use to fight. He said, I really don't know whether to believe of the things you're telling us. He said, but in my mind, down at the bottom of the hill, there's that falls, and there's a tree standing next to it. It's real high. What we ask you to do is you climb that tree, we cut it, and it's going to go down the gorge. If you survive, then I'm not doubting anything you say. So all the people got together, and the peacemaker climbed on that tree to the top, and the young man cut it. And then that tree went, and he went in the water. The water clear, there was no side effect. People stood there for hours, nothing. So they all went home. Early in the morning, The young man got up, they looked at the cornfields, there was smoke that was rising. They went there, they seen that was the peacemaker saying smoke. So they ran back and told their leader. Then he come, they went and got him. Then they said, we accept everything that you're talking about. So that's when he put up, out of the, no, solid over. There were two others that was put up at that time. And he told them, he said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get your people together. I'm going to go to the other nation. He went to the Oneidas, and he done the same thing. They were waiting already. They already had heard about this man that's talking about this great peace. They all got together. There, he put up 3 more chiefs. But what he did was he bypassed Onondaga, because in the community of Onondaga, there was a man that was real wicked that lived there. He was so wicked, he would transform himself into a bat or some kind of bird and kill human beings. So the peacemaker went there and he offered him a position. He said, I'm here to talk to you. You've been doing bad things, he said. And we have this law, the great law of peace. We're working, and we're going to create what we call longhouses. And we're going to ask you to work with us and for you to be the leader. I want you to think about it. And then he answered, he said, I will think. And when I make up my mind, I will holler. I will holler and every nation will hear. That was his answer. So the peacemaker went to the Cayugas, he put 3 more up. When he put up them 3, this other doctor hollered. And all the nations that had 3 chiefs, they all went along with one clan like they called Jerusalem. And he had crooked body, snakes in his head. And they made his body straight, and he accepted the good message. I accepted, and he was the firekeeper. So then they established the rest of the 50 chiefs. But this government, we're talking now, is based the same way the United States Constitution is based. They authorize other doctor as the head man for the 50 chiefs. To us, the Oklahoma people, is like a president. And us communities, like the Mohawk Nation, are the states. So when they did that, they created all the 50 chiefs. What they did at that time was they built 2 houses. If you look on the top side of this, as I'm holding, there's Mohawks, Onondagas, and Cayugas. They are referred to as one house. They're called the older brothers. But when you turn this over, you have 2 nations. They're called Oneidas and Cayugas. They're referred to as another house. They're called the younger brothers. So this is how they establish that they're going to work. That if something happens and they need to work together, then they'll holler and call for a grand council. And the way that that council is going to work, when they establish, on the north side of the house, you're going to have the Mohawks and the Senators sit there. On the south side of the house, you're going to have the Cayugas and Oneidas. And also nowadays, they have the Tuscarora there. And on the east side of the house, you have what they call the Onondagas. They are referred to as the firekeepers. And when there's any kind of thing that arises and it needs to be discussed, then it goes to Mohawks. Mohawks are supposed to be the well. What they refer to as the well, that's where anything that comes that will go there. And the Mohawks will deliberate, and then they put it to the senators. They become one mind with their decision. Then they put it across. It goes across to the Oneidas and Cayugas. They'll look at the whole thing, and then when they come to one mind, they send it back. Then the speaker of that day refers it to who they call the firekeepers. The firekeepers will deliberate it, and if they don't like what was passed, they'll tell. But if they accept it, then it becomes a final decision. And that was one of the first things they've done in the first council. In the very beginning, when the peacemaker was here, he showed them how the council would work. Because the Seneca Nation was referred to as the Western Door. They're called the Seneca Doorkeepers. There were two chiefs that then accepted because of the people that were the west side of that door. They said if we put our weapons down, then someday they'll come and beat up us. So the peacemaker went and told them about this thing that he's talking about, of everybody using a good mind. And the two of them said, we're very powerful, we have all these men. They were referred to as the warriors at that time. He said, we'll come to Ontario. And they did. And when they deliberated and talked, them two got up and they said, we'd like to be part of this. And from this day on, we're going to accept it. So what the peacemaker had done was he never took away that title that they had, but he changed their names. The name that he gave them was Karumpirito, meaning a man with a big hair. And the other one, we call him Wakala, meaning he opens the door. And their job is to watch that western door. If anything comes, they are the ones that will order and notify the rest of the nations. But because they had a lot of men, they said if there's ever any trouble that will come to our community, we will use these men to back up the nation. So when they did that, and everybody accepted, what the peacemaker did was he said, now what we'll do is we'll go outside. There was a tree that was standing there, and he told them, he said, you form a circle, the 50 chiefs that I created, and each of you will present 2 wampums. And what they did was they made that circle, and they held their arms together. And he told them, he said, this is as strong as you're going to be. You will be watching that tree, the tree of peace. He said, if there's ever a high wind that blows and that tree falls down, you're holding it, it will not hit the ground. You'll be able to put it back up. And from that tree, it's going to have 4 roots, and it's going to go the whole length of the Turtle Island, east, west, north, and south. And if there's ever an Indian nation that wants to take shelter for peace, they can follow that roots and come and take shelter. And they say at the time before the European people came, there were over 128 nations that were under that law of following the great law of peace when the European people got here and they seen how good it was working. So those are the things of what they did at that time. My helper, he went to sleep there for a while. But this thing, they call that a swamp. All of our wampums, we call them a swamp. This is the pattern and the land base that our people have. And it starts on the east of that square, which is known as the Mohawks. The next one is the Oneidas, and then the Onondagas, who I said they were the fire people. And we have the Cayuga and Senecas. And this extends. When he told them at that time that other nations can come, that's where, when I said there was 128 other nations that were under the Great Law of Peace at one time, they extended that. So that's how strong of a base they had, and that good mind, peace and friendship was working. Everybody was, there was no more fighting. It was safe for people, for families to go and visit anywhere they wanted. It was safe to go walking. There was no more killing. And what he did at that time, he said, this is what we'll do. We will uproot that tree that stands there. And he took that tree and uprooted it. And he told all them people that had their weapons, he said, now, this is what you're going to do. You will bring your weapons that can destroy a human being, throw it underneath where the water travels, underneath the ground, and they all throw it in there. That was a system that he used at that time. And whenever you see somewhere, there's a tree that's standing, they call that the tree of peace, that's set up by the peacemaker. But underneath that tree, at the bottom of them roots, you're going to see two weapons underneath it. That means at the time the peacemaker came, that was the time they buried their weapons. Along with that was when they done away with having war chiefs and warriors. There was no more after that. They replaced them with peace chiefs. They called Hutiana with special titles. And at that time, when that happened, he told them, he said, this is the way that it's going to be. From this day on, every chief will have a clan mother. The clan mother will have a big thing that she's going to do. If ever that something happens to a chief, say he gets sick and not able to function, that clan mother that the chief has, she is the one that holds that title. She's going to have a white wampum and a purple wampum. That white wampum presents his horns, his title. The purple wampum is what they call a notification. So if he gets sick, what they do is that she takes that wampum and she gets a speaker. That speaker goes to the chief and says, we do not know what has happened to you. We can't control if you have some kind of sickness, but while you're sick, this is the thing that we're going to do, is that we're going to take your horns and hang it above your bed. And if the Creator is going to give you more days to live on this, and if you get better, when you get up, the horns will go back on your head. If that chief dies, then that clan mother what she's supposed to do is that she'll take and tell her sub-chief. Sub-chief are supposed to be the runners for a chief. That sub-chief will notify the rest of the chiefs. Then they have a meeting. They're going to notify the rest of the chiefs of the Confederacy. That's the way that it's set up, even to this day. When a chief dies in a Mohawk Nation, we send runner. A clan warrior dies, we also send runner. Because of that wampum. That wampum, the purple, goes what I show you. The younger brothers, Oneidas and Cayugas, they have a man that's in charge. He'll take that. And they'll send a speaker to do the burial and to do the small condolence. And then they'll set a date whenever they'll hold a big condolence. That's to raise a chief. And when they do that, they raise a chief back in our community. This is what they do. That purple wampum comes back to that woman. Each grandmother holds that same position. That's how they function. But if there's ever a debt in the community, the way that they fix it is that if it's a chief, then the three brothers will be notified and conduct the funeral. They also fixed it at that time if it's an ordinary person. Then the way that they operate, what I told you a little while ago about the plants being made, where I said when the plants were made, they call it the river of life, where so many plants were created this side and this side. Well, that's what they call when they lose somebody. Their mind has fallen. They start to work with one another. So those are the things what the Confederacy has done. But this other thing, I've got 10 minutes to tell about this. This again, when the white people entered the people of the Haudenosaunee. The Haudenosaunee, being followers of a good mind, treated our white brothers when they arrived here with respect. And they gifted them everything that they needed to survive. They showed them how to live among us. So after a while, what the white people said to our people, you have really helped us for a while. What we're going to do is that we're going to become friends. Alderosa is what they call it. So the Oklahoma replies and he said, I agree, it's a good thing. We'll use that. We'll call it a good mind. We'll work together in peace and friendship. So the white man at that time said, it's good. I'm going to treat you like a son in our agreement. The Oklahoma person at that time said, it cannot be as you think. The reason I'm going to say no to that is a father can scold his son, and our agreements will never work if we were to do that. We're going to refer ourselves as brothers. That's the way it's going to be. The first one they ever made was called a friendship belt. And I think that's more. And that is what they use. They call it 3 links of chain. Friendship, a good mind, and peace. That's the agreement between Oklahoma, the native people, and the white man. But before that wampum belt come along, what they had said, the white man said, I will write everything on a paper. The woman says that wouldn't be a good thing, because in time, paper can get old, paper can be destroyed or burnt. He said, and then our friendship would get old. So at the time, he said, we'll use this chain. The woman says that chain can get rusty, and our friendship can get rusty too. So that's when they come up with the silver covenant chain. And then the woman says, I will use what the Creator has given us. We put our things in wampum. And when they did that, they asked, they said, who's going to be the witness to the agreements that we're going to make? The Native people said at that time, the Creator, the things that He has made, and the Creator Himself. Our agreement will be strong, and it's going to be like this. As long as the water is flowing, as long as the grass is growing, as long as the sun is shining, that's how long our agreements will stand. That was the first agreement that was ever made. And the white people that came and made agreements with the Haudenosaunee people were called the Dutch. So after a while, what happened was that they made another one. That's the one that they had over there. It's what they call the two-row wampum belt. And the way that they made that is that they symbolize the way the river is made. The Oklahoma people of Turtle Island told the white man, he said, I have a canoe. You have a big ship that sails. What I'm going to do is that my way of life, the things that I believe, and my people will be in that canoe. Yours, you have a big sail ship. Your laws and your people will be there. And we're going to go side by side and sail that river. And in our agreement, you will not legislate any kind of laws for my people. I will do the same. And every now and then, we shall renew this agreement. And when we do that, it's going to be just like the way it was the first time. We will sit down and smoke the peace pipe. And we will dress just the way we had dressed a long time ago. Those were the ways of our people. What they used was the good mind, respect, caring. That's how they made and took care of the European people the first time that they come across. So that was when the first agreement was signed. They called that the two-row. So even today, when our council, and sometimes we go, whom you refer to as the Land Council people, we go together to Ottawa, we go with them to Ottawa, we go with them to Washington, D.C. We always remind the President and his people the agreements that were made. That's one thing they don't like to hear, because they promised a lot of stuff a long time ago, and it's not being fulfilled. But they create a lot of things which doesn't actually work for us. Say with the land claims, what they do, we have a different understanding of how our grandfathers did. But when we go to court, they use these latches. Latches means that we don't do nothing within 100 years. you lose your case. Our grandfathers never heard of any such a thing when they signed that treaty. The other thing is that there was no court system at that time when they made these treaties. So those are the things when you think about there's no justice. So it's now time for me to take a break. I think the things that I put here, I cannot talk about everything. At least you have an idea what our people did a long time. If there was ever any kind of dispute, they always use the chiefs to settle. And the way the laws are made, a chief cannot decide or take sides. If there's an argument within his own people, he has to stand there and try and settle that. That's the way our system works. Same position for a clamor. Her job is to work with all the other clamors and using the same line. What he told the peacemaker in the end, he said this will be the way your people will operate. Whenever a consensus or a decision is made, when all decision is going to come, is that we're going to call it one body, one head, one heart, one voice. That's the thing that he has given to the people of Haudenosaunee. That's the way their decision, that's what you call one mind, using a good mind. That's the way that they're supposed to operate. And I take from the work that the Justice Department, Joyce and her group works, they're taking a lot of the stuff that our people made agreements on a long time ago. They take the concept, the 211, and they do that, whatever was in there, to work, make it work for our people. So in my heart, I say they're doing a good job for our people. So this is where I'm going to end it today. Give some time to my cousin, Brian David. He'll be next.
Start off by welcoming my cousin, Sego Tommy. It's like I said, I feel like my cousins and the younger cousin, you know, between two powerhouses in terms of speakers. Originally, I was asked to speak on the Indian Act in replacement of Nathan Richards, who couldn't make it this morning because of the weather. And I thought, what an odd place to start. So I think the creator had it right. It just happened. They took the floor first, because that's where it needs to start. That's where it starts. What is the belief system? Where does it come from? How did it survive? Where is it going to take us? Those are the ingredients. That's where you get the ingredients. Begin building any type of a system, a justice system. Okay. Before jumping into that, I want to talk a bit about Akwesasne, the area. I was reading an excerpt from the Franklin County. It was a historical society edition, circa, I don't know, 1803. And they were talking about Westville, which is just a couple of miles up the road here from us. And they were talking about cutting lumber. And they were taking out, I believe there were pine trees, white pine trees, in the order of 150 feet long. That was in 1803. If they were 150-foot long trees, they were taken to Montreal to be transported to England. Those trees must have been at least 225 feet high. 225 feet high, to place that into perspective, was higher than a 10-story building. That's what was here. That was what was here when the colonists arrived. That's what they cut. That's what was taken over to Great Britain that allowed Great Britain to build its naval force, that allowed Great Britain to become the greatest naval force in the world. But it all came from here. It wasn't replaced. And when they were finished with that, this literally was a rainforest here. It had a rainforest effect, I believe. We have an environmentalist here. I think they would probably agree with me. That there was somewhat of a rainforest effect. After that environmental impact, we lost the deer, they left. They took whatever fair burn animals they were over to Europe. They trapped and took, never replaced. Built a dam. Species of fish were taken, never replaced. And lastly, they started nibbling out at bits and pieces of land that we had, our traditional territory. This area originally was protected by the Royal Proclamation of 1763, King George III. It was supposed to protect this area. And the reason behind that is that King George didn't want the Mohawks getting involved in war against England, not at that time. Couldn't afford it. That was the motive for the Royal Proclamation. They protected all of our rights for that. It was reinforced by the Treaty of Ghent. Not even 100 years after that, you have the Dominion of Canada that puts into place an Indian Act, which essentially is a document that structures internment. How do we go from protection to internment within 75 years? But that's what happened here. If I'm going to talk about the Indian Act, I have to talk about it within the context of internment. In Toronto, they say, well, no, that was set up so we could provide you with programs and services. I say, no, it was not. Come on. You have an Indian agent who essentially performs as a warden. You've got law enforcement inside, you've got the RCMP. They're basically the internal officers and guards to keep law and order. You've got a defined perimeter around. There isn't a fence there. There might be 2 or 3 years after Trump's time. At the time there isn't, but you might just as well say there is. Because to leave that area, you have to go to the warden to get a permit. You have to get a permit to leave your own territory. If you're caught off without that piece of paper, you can be arrested. That's the way it was prior to 1934. When we're talking about justice, we're talking about rights, we're talking about jurisdictions and all of these things. We have to remember where we came from. Prior to, what, 1961, we literally weren't considered to be Canadians. It was illegal for an Indian or for a band to hire a lawyer for any suit prior to 1954, I believe. Prior to 1954, we couldn't do it. Legally couldn't do it. Only the Indian agent could hire legal counsel for us. That's the system we were in. Okay? The political system we had in Upper was patterned very much similar to what was discussed nationally on the clan system, but except that it was kind of diminished to a community level type government, but it operated on the clan system. When the Indian Act came in, Canada said, you have to elect. The clan mother said, no. No, we're not gonna. We're not gonna elect. Canada sent down its officers. About 20 years after that declaration, and they killed one of the chiefs, and they imprisoned the remainder. They took 15 people from God knows where to Cornwall, and rumor has it they had had some drinks, and that's where the first election was held in this community. That's Canada's form of democracy. That's how democracy in that form came to Akwesasne in the elected form. At the same time, there was a movement to subvert the traditional system and the traditional teachings. The traditional people had to go underground within our own community. We used to have meetings on islands, different islands at different homes. Out of the eyes of the Indian agent, out of the eyes of the RCMP. Okay? And the people supported that. And they helped to hide that. Because they knew their future was not there. Their future, they had to know where they came from. They had to know the history. They had to know the culture. All of a sudden, the faith keepers, the people that had knowledge, became very, very valuable assets to the community. And they were treated as such. 20 years, 30 years ago, Kevin says, well, it's time for self-government, time for y'all to take it on yourself. And we said, well, wait a minute now, before we go too far with this. What about all that pine you took? What about all that land that's out there? What about the St. Lawrence Seaway? What about the park project? What about all those kids that you took off to residential school? You just wipe that off the street and say, okay, we're jumping in with Canadian. They say, well, you don't have to do that, you're Canadian now, we did that in 1960. How can you do that when there was no representation, native representation in your legislatures? How democratic is that? Oh, we decided what's best for you? You all are Canadian citizens now. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. In the early 1960s, there was a minister that came down, minister from Quebec. They were having a council meeting down in St. Regis. The chief at the time was Ennis Mitchell. And the Quebec minister came down to bring his message that the kids don't have to learn French. What he didn't know was that at that time, the kids were trying to learn Mohawk, trying to learn English, and those that went to church were trying to learn Latin. Because it was still Latin, a Latin-based religion at that time. 3 religions. And he came down and said, no, but you have to learn French too. And this swung his fist on the table. And he says, go back to Quebec. Back to Quebec. He said, no. Our children are our responsibility. That's what he said. That gave rise to the first school committee that had enormous powers. He said, it's up to our people to determine the kind of education that's appropriate and correct for our children. Okay. What does this have to do with justice? It has a lot to do with it because it's making, first of all, an assertion of a certain jurisdiction. People are asserting that they have authority to make decisions within a certain area, and they're prepared to make laws to back. Very similar to what we do in justice. But it's a whole community politically that all of a sudden are saying no. They build a bridge. They decide all of a sudden that they're going to start collecting, what is it they call it? They used to call that duty. Duty on import. And for the people that are returning back to Cornwall Island, they're just going to get groceries for their own personal use, they're getting charged duty. And they say, no, we're not going to do that. They say, well, you have to. Canada, it's a law. Justin says, okay, it's your law. We'll close the bridge. We close the bridge. When we talk about justice, we tend to look at it and say, it's a microcosm. Totally disconnected from politics. In the Native world, it's very connected. It's very political. Because in justice, we are talking about the authorities and jurisdictions that are politically driven. Much of the development was based on these principles and premises. I worked as director of the Justice Department for some time. And for me, it was a task of just organizing what was already there, placing structure around it in context. It was already laid out. It just needed to be organized, this information. The direction needed to be organized. But most importantly, I think what we needed was good collaborative support. What is it that the community really wanted? Do you want a provincial system? We can give that to you. All you have to do is say we voluntarily give jurisdiction to Ontario. Y'all can come in. We can do that with Canada. We can do that with a resolution following a referendum. They said, is that what everybody wants? Of course, they said no. We said, okay, then if that's what you, what is it we're looking for? And they said, if we're going to have a justice system, we want to have a justice system that is, number one, community-based. Number two, that takes into account our unique history, culture, and our tradition, principles. Okay. 2 sentences, but it's an awfully weak mandate. Awfully weak mandate. Especially when they start talking about we need to incorporate our traditional principles into this. Because traditional principles are, you say that diametrically opposite to what the Europeans brought over. It's not the same. Not the same. In their mind, they say, we'll put a judge in front and you bring the information and that person will make a judgment against another person. In our way of thinking, we are taught from the time we were knee-high to a grasshopper, it is not appropriate for a person to make judgment on another person. You can render an opinion. It's not up to you to decide. It's not up to you. We have a different structure for that, a different way of approaching that. That's the way we started to design our particular programs and services. It was viewed as a threat to Ontario, it was viewed as a threat to Canada. Quebec, I don't think really fully understood. New York State, well, on the court side, okay, we had the recent court law that was passed. We had the minister, Justice Minister, who basically said, yes, it's about time. And what the minister basically has said in that endorsement is that it seems to be okay at this point if we run a parallel system, if those parallel systems kind of communicate, if there's some type of an administrative intermediary between the 2 systems that allow the 2 systems to coordinate so they're not in conflict with each other. Nothing wrong with that. If we have that reinforced in our self-government agreement with statements on how we deal with conflict, that seems to be okay. Because the alternative to that, that was the direction we were going. We had an agreement with the Seneca. It was kind of a court-to-court agreement dealing with, how would you say, youngsters that are kidnapped by their parents that have been separated and find their way in our jurisdiction. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And then we had another agreement with Syracuse, and I said, you know what? Why don't we have an agreement with Puerto Rico? Why don't we have an agreement with Cuba? Why don't we have an agreement with Ecuador, with all of the South Americans? Why don't we have an agreement with Australia? Because at some point, I'd like to be able to walk into Parliament with 50 agreements, that's like that, and slap that in front of them to say half the world agrees that we have a legitimate court. What is your problem? What is your problem? It doesn't operate the way you want it to operate. Mohawks don't behave the way you want them to behave. It's historical. It's just the way it is. We're different people. We're different people. Doesn't mean that we're dangerous people. Not really. This means we're different. We have different ways of looking at things. And that was understood back by the Dutch. All we're doing is regurgitating what we knew of 300 years ago. That's what we're moving forward with today. So, that's a brief, I've taken about 20 minutes. Okay, it's a lot of time. I know everybody's hungry because it's such a long time since we had lunch. Breakfast. Second breakfast. But I would just like to close by saying for all of you that have traveled through what was probably the most miserable storm. I know it was the most miserable storm this year, this season. Okay, y'all got here. Thumbs up, man. Golden Star to all of you. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, good afternoon to those of you who were there. I'm just so sorry I can't be there with you. I had looked forward to this for a long time. But it sounds like weather-wise, it's a good thing I didn't try. I've been honored to be asked, but I'm also with some trepidation. I'm a historian. My PhD was in history. And I'm very aware of how those of us from European backgrounds that our systems have co-opted, subverted, and repressed so many indigenous traditions from around the world. As Barry Lopez says in his lovely little book, The Rediscovery of North America, we've imposed rather than proposed. So you really can see the history of colonization that way, as imposing rather than proposing. I'm also a photographer, and so I've paid attention to First Nation photographers. And again, how photography has been used to exploit people. And so I always enjoy it when First Nation photographers use the medium subversively, like Zig Jackson did in his project called Indian Photographing Tourist Photographing Indian. Pretty funny project. Well, the topic today really raises some important concerns that I'd like to keep in mind as we talk, and that is a question that's been bothering me for a long time. Will restorative justice, like the criminal justice system we're trying to improve or replace, is it just going to become another globalizing force, a new instrument of colonization? Or on the other hand, will it be an invitation to dream and contextualize and to draw upon legitimate local and indigenous traditions? Will it maintain the status quo, or will it encourage real change? These are something I think we need to keep in mind as we talk about these things. The topic Joyce gave me was, she said, talk about your work, restorative principles, and what to consider when a First Nation wants to develop their own judicial system. So I'm going to try to do that. Let me give you a couple observations from my own background and experiences, a couple of things that have shaped my thinking. One influence for me has been my Mennonite Anabaptist faith and culture. It's provided some of the values and concerns that overlap with yours. For instance, our tradition puts a lot of focus on community and on the importance of healthy relationships. It focuses on integrity and trustworthiness and honesty, and emphasizes a correspondence between what we say and what we do. It involves a commitment to living peacefully with both our neighbors and our enemies. And it adds another one. We have historically been a minority, sometimes a persecuted minority, and it's given us a sense, at least my generation and earlier, of being somewhat separate, and historically a deep suspicion of the state, of the government. And so, even though I advocate collaboration, that bias remains and does shape some of the things that I think and do. Another influence on me, in 1963, I left my state white community and I entered Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a historically black college. It's a college where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. became on the faculty. He graduated from there and others. And I graduated in 1966. I was the first white graduate to graduate from there. One of the things that I really learned from that, and really stuck with me, is how what we know, what we think we know, the truths that we hold, how much they're shaped by who we are, by what we've experienced, by our gender, by our ethnicity, by the things we've been through. And so, as much as I want to be global in my understanding, I am a white male of European background, and that shapes how I think. So I advocate what I call humility, and that is the deep recognition of the limits of what each of us knows. I made that point in Washington a few years ago at a conference, and the next speaker was Chief Justice Robert Yazzie of the Navajo Nation. You may know Chief Yazzie. He said, well, that reminds me of a story. He said, we had a man come to visit us in Navajo land who was called the man who knows everything. So we decided to put him to a test. We asked him why rabbits leave these little round droppings on the ground. And he had some weird kind of physics and analysis of why they do that. And then we asked him why cows leave these cow pies in the field. And this was a more theological kind of answer. And then we asked him why horses leave road apples in the road. And again, his answer just seemed really crazy. He said, we concluded that the man who knows everything doesn't know shit. The older I get, the more I realize I don't know shit. So keep that in mind. When I was writing Changing Lenses, I was drawing from my own indigenous tradition as a European American, as a Christian. And even if one isn't either one of those things, I think it's important to have some understanding of that history, because it's that history that got us in the mess that we're in today. It was a really bad mix of emerging Western law and emerging Christian theology that got us in the punitive culture and the dominating culture that we're in today. But when I was writing that, I was vaguely aware that there were indigenous traditions that might be parallel to what I was thinking. But I didn't really know anything about it. But in the many years since that time, because I've traveled, because so many of my students have come from a variety of indigenous traditions, I've come to realize how great our debt is to those traditions. Most indigenous traditions have a restorative element. And in fact, in many of them, it's a predominant element, as you probably know. Yeah, ideally, in fact, I think restorative justice is a kind of contemporary Western way of articulating the best of indigenous traditions. Because these traditions have often been repressed by the Western legal system, by colonial powers, sometimes restorative justice can serve as a catalyst to draw out, to legitimate, help these kind of traditions function in the modern world. Let me tell you two short stories that make that point for me. New Zealand has one of the most revolutionary legal systems in the Western world. I'll say a little bit more about it later. It was new. I was first in New Zealand in 1994, and I was asked to speak around the country. And at the end of my tour, Chief Justice Mick Brown, he's Maori, and he was the Chief Justice of the youth justice system. He said, you don't know how good it is to hear you as a European, a Westerner, describing the system. He says, because people want to write it off as a Maori system. And what you've done is help people of European extraction to be able to understand. Another story, when I was teaching restorative justice, one of my assignments in the semester was that I would ask people in the class to go find someone who didn't know about restorative justice and explain it to them. And they had some great times at that. But there was a fellow named Musa. Musa was a survivor from the genocide in Rwanda. He had lost his family in that genocide. He had come to study with us, and he had remarried just recently a Rwandan woman. And so he decided he would do his assignment by explaining restorative justice to his new wife. And he had hardly gotten started before she began to laugh. And he said, "Why are you laughing?" He said, "You came all the way across the world here and paid all this money to learn what every African already knows." And I thought that says it well. In a lot of ways, again, I think restorative justice is kind of just a current articulation of what a lot of people already do. Some of our critics have tried to say that it's a myth of origin. We try to give it legitimacy by claiming this myth of origin, but I don't think that's true at all. I think restorative justice is an affirmation of some very important traditions. So I see restorative justice as a blend of the best of indigenous traditions and modern human rights sensibilities. As the New Zealanders would say, a Pakeha, European way of saying what every African, what many indigenous people already know. So I think it's true, as long as we remember Barry Lopez's admonition, to listen, not impose, to propose, not impose. Let me say a little bit about what I mean when I say restorative justice. I want to acknowledge, first of all, the problem with the term. It isn't an ideal form in English. Restoring suggests you're going back to something. And of course, in many kinds of harm, we can't go back. You can't go back and recreate or redo or undo what you did. Maybe healing is a better term, I'm not sure. It's a problematic term. The Navajo refused for many years to use the term, with good reason. They said it's an Anglo term, it doesn't incorporate the comprehensive nature of what we understand as justice. The other problem with the terminology is that restorative justice has gotten so popular that everybody's calling everything restorative justice. Today, we heard all kinds of crazy things being called restorative justice. So it makes it complicated. There are also different orientations towards restorative justice. Complexity makes things more complex. Some people talk of restorative justice particularly as a kind of practice. They might advocate victim-offender compensation, or they might advocate circle processes, or from New Zealand family group compensation, or victim-offender dialogue in various cases. For a lot of people, that's what restorative justice is. It's a meeting of people where people get to talk about the harm that happened and the harm that caused and so forth. And that's fair enough. But I also think it's more than that. A second way we hear the term restorative justice used these days as a kind of social movement aimed at transformation. It's a much broader movement, connects with other social movements. We just held a conference here at our university last spring about restorative justice as a social movement. And none of these are mutually exclusive. But the third one, and this is the primary orientation that I advocate, and that is restorative justice as a particular philosophy and set of values that can be applied to lots of different situations. Yes, it often involves encounters, circles, and so forth. But to me, it's bigger than that. It's a particular orientation. It's a particular way of approaching particularly wrongdoing and how we live together. You might say that it's a respectful, relational understanding of justice as opposed to the more individualistic, rights-based justice that we see certainly in the U.S. justice system. It's one that values dialogue and collaboration above conflict and argument. Again, the Western legal system is based on argument, based on the idea that we're adversaries. It's an approach to justice that tries to avoid polarities, tries to balance concern for all parties, victims, offenders, community members. So I often try to summarize restorative justice very simply in three principles. First of all, it focuses on harm and the needs that result from harm. It says that what really matters about wrongdoing is the harm that's been done, and when people are harmed, they have needs. So the first principle of restorative justice, the way I see it, is its focus on harms and needs. Secondly, it focuses on obligations. When we harm someone, when we are in a negative relationship with someone, we have an obligation to try to understand that, acknowledge it, make it right. So, first principle has to do with harms and needs. Second principle has to do with obligations. When we're talking about a harm that's been done, the person who caused the harm probably has the first obligation, but the whole community may have obligations as well. The third principle is the principle of engagement. People who are affected by these situations ought to be part of the solution. And that often means chances to engage with each other, to be empowered in the process, to have dialogue and so forth. So to make it very simple, I try to focus it around harm/needs, obligations, and engagement. Another way to look at it is say this: our criminal justice system, the legal system, revolves around three questions. It says what laws are broken, who did it, what do they deserve? In my mind, restorative justice starts with some different questions. It asks, who's been hurt in this situation? What are their needs? Whose obligations are they? What's the cost? Who needs to be part of the process, and so forth. So it's a different set of questions that we bring to a situation. I'm speaking of restorative justice as a push to harm, but of course it can be seen as a much bigger thing. It can be seen, and I'll talk a bit about that later. But these principles have to be underlined with values. And there are lots of values that we can talk about. I saw some of those in your literature. I tend to emphasize three values that start with R in English. It's an easy way to remember. One of them is respect. I think essentially restorative justice is about respect. I think that's what people who have been harmed want. That's what people who caused harm want. I think that's why harm is so traumatic. I just think respect is critical. Second thing is relationship. It reminds us that we live in relationship with each other. We all live in a web of relationships. And third is responsibility. Because we live in relationship, we do have responsibilities for our actions. So, three principles: harm/needs, obligation, engagement. Three values: respect, responsibility, relationship. That's one way of articulating restorative justice. Now, I'm going to come back to my experiences and some of the observations that come out of that. Three things. First of all, I was trained as a historian. That affects how I think of it. Secondly, I spent many years before I came, even after I came to this university, in a national office working with communities who wanted to do justice differently. So I had a lot of experience working with communities, helping them think through what their needs were, what the possibilities were, and how restorative justice might work in those situations. And third, throughout my work, I have worked with both people who have caused the harm, so-called offenders, and people who have been harmed, so-called victims. I try to avoid these victim-offender terms. I think they're problematic, and I'm sure you feel the same way about that. So a couple of things that came out of that experience. One of them is a real bias toward having justice done in specific communities, not from the top down, but from the community up. But I really think justice needs to grow out of communities and shouldn't be imposed from the top, it should come from the bottom up. Secondly, even though I'm skeptical of systems, I do value the collaboration between professionals and lay people. I think one of the problems of our criminal justice system is it puts all the power and all the expertise in the hands of professionals, and yet the community has so much to offer, and the professionals need the counterbalance of what that community has to offer. So I believe in value collaboration. Third, I'm very concerned, and I have been from the beginning, about powers of co-optation and subversion. I always tell my students, every intervention, every social intervention, no matter how well we intend it, is going to have unintended consequences. It's going to be tended to be co-opted. It's going to tend to be subverted. You know, a new idea I always think goes through three stages. First, ignore it. That's the first act of the restorative justice. Then secondly is resist it. And then third is co-opted. And as a field on the whole, that's where we are with restorative justice today. In many parts of it, many communities are beyond the resistance. We're at the point where people are co-opting. So we have to build in safeguards. I'll say more about that. A third thing is, as a historian, I read Louis Koser, a sociologist. He talks about, his book was called Greedy Institutions. And that is the reality that institutions, again, no matter how benign, tend to be greedy, tend to take over things. And certainly that's true. So that's one of mine. I've had the privilege of spending a lot of time in New Zealand. And I learned some really important things. In 1989, they revolutionized the youth justice system. They did it as a result, well, they had a very high incarceration rate for young people, one of the highest in the world. But the Maori, the indigenous people of New Zealand, came to the government and they said to them, they said, what you're doing is institutionally racist and it's culturally inappropriate. And they made a very convincing case. So part of what came out of it, part of what emerged was a result of the critique and concerns and the values of the Maori community. What resulted was, at least in law, a culturally neutral process, and by law it's supposed to be made culturally appropriate for whoever is involved. So if a facilitator is bringing together a South Pacific family and a Maori family, they need to negotiate with those parties what that conference is going to look like to be culturally appropriate. I think that was really an important lesson. Third, they made an essentially restorative justice process, a conference, the default. For serious crime in New Zealand, you're not supposed to go to court. You're supposed to go to a family group conference. And that family group conference is supposed to sort out the whole thing. What you owe the victim is invited to that, what needs to happen with the so-called offender, and so forth. So only if you can't decide it there are you supposed to go to court. That's an encouraging idea to me. Fourth, they built in due process protections. They recruited and trained a special set of lawyers, non-adversarial lawyers, to make sure the process did not step on people's rights. It was not an adversarial process. Fourth, they established clear values and principles and said, now go forth and you follow these principles. So instead of a lot of different, at least the way it was designed, a lot of different tiny rules, they had a clear set of principles and values. And as a friend of mine who practices there used to say, we do principle practice. We keep the principles in our back pocket and we practice the principles. It's far from perfect. Victims weren't as central when it was designed as it should be. The Maori still complain that it often isn't as sensitive to them as it should be. But to me, it's been a real inspiration and some real concrete ideas about how we might move ahead with that. So, with all that background, let me make, one of the things Joyce asked is that I make some suggestions about how I want to move ahead. So I would like to make 7 hesitant suggestions for your consideration. The first one, as I said, is similar to what I said earlier. I really think justice needs to be contextually appropriate and built from the community. You can't take a process and a philosophy from one community and just plug it into another one. You have to, you can use it as a catalyst for ideas, it can give you ideas, but you can't just copy it. So it's really important, I think, and it must be for you who are gathered there as well, to really listen to and dialogue with specific communities. Ask, what are the needs in this community? And what are the resources? What are the gaps that are not being filled? And what does justice mean in your culture and context? I think those are just critical questions, and they take a lot of dialogue. What traditional approaches and values have there been in your community that can be used? The novel will tell me they had to use anthropologists to dig up some of those because they've been so repressed by Western colonialism. But they found some really important things there. So lots of listening and dialogue, circle processes. One tool that I found useful in these dialogues is to have groups do a force field analysis. What you do basically is you take a piece of paper and on one side you put all the forces that are encouraging a more restorative approach. Then in the opposite column you have all the forces that are resisting or diverting a restorative approach. The political, the cultural, the social, all those things that are pushing forward, pushing against it. And then you brainstorm, how can we address those pressures? How can we redirect them, work around them, and so forth. So one of those methodologies, besides circle processes and those kinds of dialogue, are the force field analysis. It helps you get really concrete about what your resources are, what your needs are, what the existing forces might be. The second thing that I think is so important, and you are doing that today, and that is to learn from other communities and network with other communities. I think we have a lot to learn from New Zealand first. I think we have a lot to learn from the Navajo. So I think finding ways to connect with those communities and share ideas. One of the devices that we found useful is the Zoom technology we're using today. We bring together people from around the world in a conversation where we can all see each other with this own computer technology that means we don't always have to travel. But the point is, we need to learn from each other and share ideas, both the good ideas and what's working and what's not working. So, my third suggestion is we share not just what some people have called butterfly stories, but also bullfrog stories. Our critics like to say we only share the happy stories, the good stories. Well, that may be true, but we need to, there are the other stories that one of my former students called bullfrog stories, and that is the stories where things didn't go so well. We need to hear both of those stories because there's so much to learn. It's not popular, I know, and one of the most negative audiences I ever addressed was early in this field when I did a lecture about the challenges ahead, about the way the forces of co-optation and subversion were going to be operating, and people just almost turned on me in the audience. They didn't want to hear it. A friend of mine was speaking in Toronto some years ago, and he thought he was doing a good job of being favorable to restorative justice, but pointing out the problems. And when he was done, it was time for question and answer. And he said it was this elderly white woman with blue hair got up and raised her hand and said, "Oh, my first question." He calls on her. He said, "You know, you are just a turd in a punch bowl." And she sat there. Well, it may feel like a turd in a punch bowl to be telling these stories, but we need both the bullfrog story and the butterfly. We have a lot to learn from that. So let's not be afraid to share our values and our challenges as well as the things that go really well. The fourth thing that I've really learned is important is again what I call principle practice. And that is, let's be really clear about what our principles are and our values are, and then train people to follow those. Not so much technique, but here are the principles, here are the values. Now go forth and do principle practice. So I think the more you can articulate and spell out those principles and values and train people to follow them, the better we are. A fifth point, and that is that we include people we call victims, people who've been harmed, in our planning right from the start. You know, the Western legal system is so offender-oriented. It's all about the offender, and that's why victims are so left out. But too often, those of us who are trying to do restorative justice replicate the same thing. We spend our energy on the so-called offender, the person who's caused the harm, and we don't incorporate equally the needs and the roles of people who have been harmed. So I think people who have been harmed, people we call victims, ought to be part of our startup planning. They ought to be part of our governing boards. They ought to be central, because if restorative justice is really about harm and needs, then those who have been harmed, those who have needs, need to be right in the center of things with us. It won't always be easy because their perspectives are going to be something different. But I think it's absolutely critical. A sixth point, that is, I encourage us to build in due process protections right from the start, for two reasons. One, because it is so important that we not be unaware of people's rights, but also because if we want the government, the state, to take it seriously, we are going to have to show them that we can do that. I've had lots of conversations in places like South Africa and Northern Ireland where the government was so reticent, so reluctant to allow traditional indigenous justice processes to go ahead because they, at least this was the excuse they gave, they didn't feel like due process protections and human rights would be protected. So finding ways to do that. I had an Australian Aboriginal elder tell me one time, she said, here's how we do it. She said, in our tradition, we have some practices that are not very restorative. And so as a safeguard, we actually invite the prosecutor to sit in our circle just to help make sure we don't get out of bounds. Well, that may or may not be the right way to do it. But I think the point is we need to be very explicit. How are we going to protect human rights, due process, gender equality, that kind of thing in our process? I know there have been critiques of First Nation communities in some restorative justice programs because they felt like women weren't being taken seriously or their rights weren't being protected and so on. We need to build that in somehow. In New Zealand, they do it by two ways. One, they have a specially trained lawyer who sits in, not to be adversarial, but to help the process. And secondly, more serious things have to be signed off by the judge just to make sure they are out of line. But building in due process protection somehow. And finally, I would encourage us to ground everything we do into a deep understanding of trauma. Not just individual trauma, but societal trauma and historical trauma. One of the things that's happened in our program is that we get people involved in the world, and we began to realize they were bringing lots of trauma, and that you can't really talk about justice without addressing that trauma. Then the World Trade Center bombing happened, and we were asked to begin training leaders from around the world in how trauma works out in communities and through history. And so we started a program we call STAR. It's still running, training, 5-day training in how trauma works in our personal lives, in our bodies, but also in our society and historically. One of the things that we've been really interested in, for instance, is how the history of slavery, how the historical trauma of slavery has gone down through the generations to affect us, both black and white. So I think an understanding of trauma and how it's impacted our communities both in history and currently is just critically important. And I think it's terribly important that our practitioners have some understanding of trauma. Because often people are going to be coming into these processes, both so-called victims and so-called offenders who have experienced trauma. So I would just encourage to be very explicit about getting trained on training around trauma. I've been doing this for a number of years when people started coming to me and saying, well, you know, restorative justice is a way of life. And I was kind of mystified at first because, you know, we started doing restorative justice. We were just trying to do something better about what we call crime and improve what we were thinking of the justice process. But we began to catch it finally, and that is because restorative justice embodies some values that we want to live by. It reminds us that we live in a relevant relationship. It reminds us of the importance of respect and responsibility. And American culture, at least, is so rights-based, so individualistic, so acquisitional, that restorative justice calls us to a more holistic way of living. I don't need to tell you this, probably I've often heard First Nation people say that restorative justice basically is a way of life, as they know it. And so, it probably doesn't come as a surprise for you, but it took me a little bit to get it. I want to conclude the way I often do. You know, our Western culture in academic institutions put a lot of stress on skepticism and judgment. We are taught that the way you learn is by critiquing, by being skeptical, and by making judgments. Some of you maybe have read Rupert Ross's book, Return to the Teaching. He talked about how English is inherently a language that focuses on noun and judgment, as opposed to verbs and more fluid. But we have a Western culture that's really founded on skepticism and judgment. When I started one of my early philosophy classes, the philosophy teacher walked into the class and he said, he looked around the room and he said, you know, you're all Westerners, so you have been shaped by the philosopher Descartes. Remember, some of you from your college philosophy course, Descartes was a philosopher who said, I'm going to doubt everything possible except what I can't doubt at all. he finally came up with the one thing he couldn't doubt: I think, therefore I am. Well, my philosophy teacher said that attitude of skepticism and criticism is what's embedded in the Western academic system and the legal system and so on. He said, that's not how we're going to do philosophy. We're going to start in wonder and awe. That has been so important to me. We're going to start in wonder and awe. Somebody gave me a book one time that defined wonder as, said, wonder is unknowing experiencing pleasure. Wonder is unknowing experiencing pleasure. In other words, we don't have to know everything. We can't know everything. We can have a lot of appreciation and enjoyment from what we don't know and the discoveries that come from that. Let me end with a quick story. Ali Gohar was from Pakistan. He came to our program a number of years ago. He had quite a transforming experience in our program. He began to, well, for one thing, really began to realize how chauvinistic he was, and so he began to be much more concerned. He began to realize how women were excluded from the traditional process in this community. But he also began to realize that the Jurga process, which was a traditional process in his culture, was really had some restorative elements. And so he went back to Pakistan, and he began to use restorative justice to dialogue with elders about how Jurga could be used in a contemporary world in a way that would bring into more gender equality and more human rights issues. As a result, now many police stations in Pakistan, when someone offender is caught, a group of elders come into the police station and meet with him instead of going through the courts. Or last week I got an article from him from the Pakistan newspaper saying that now Jurga is being used to resolve traditional disputes between Afghani and Pakistan people on the borders, because they share a lot of cultural elements. In other words, I think Ali demonstrates what I tried to say, and that is restorative justice is in a lot of ways an articulation of what people have been doing for years, but it also brings the possibility of bringing in human rights and modern human rights sensibilities to play in the modern world. There, I'm going to stop there. I hope this has been some help. I don't know. You can tell me whether it's of any help or not. You can always throw out the parts that aren't useful and use whatever it is. So I'll stop and see if there's any comments, questions, or whatever. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mike. Very, very interesting and very informative. Thank you so much. Before I do a summary, I'm wondering if there's some burning questions in the room. If you have a question, just turn around, please, and go to the laptop so that you don't, we can hear you.
Can you hear me, Howard?
I can.
Okay, my question is, I work with the Akwesasne Justice Department, and a lot of times we're making laws, and especially with the Akwesasne Community Justice Program, where we get diversions from the criminal justice system out of Ontario and Quebec, and those diversions sends them back to us so that we could do the circle sentencing, or it's kind of like with a group of elders that will say, this is what you need to do to heal yourself as an offender. What we can't do, what's been a difficulty from, as far as the program is concerned, is getting the victim to the table. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, that can be an issue. One of the things we've found that it's easier to get victims to the table when the so-called crime defense is more serious. Sometimes people, when they don't consider, they don't want to put out the energy and so forth. But I think a lot of it is how we invite people. We need this. It helps if we sit with people who've been victimized, help them think through the risks and benefits, help them think about how they might benefit, and also, honestly, the risk. And also knowing, one of the reasons it's so important to have victims involved in our programs is that a lot of times the rest of us don't know what the hot buttons are. We don't know, our language may not be as sensitive to victims as it should be. So we've found by having victims reviewing what we're doing, part of our training and so forth, but that really helps. We've also realized that some people are just better at sitting down with victims and inviting them than others. Years ago, when I was running a program, we had a time when we were just not getting very good victim participation. And so, I don't know, some of you have met my colleague, Lorraine Spitzman-Amstutz, who is a wonderful practitioner. We gave her the job for a while to just contact victims. You know what, almost 100% of those who have been victimized in our cases agreed to meet when she met with them, that she had a knack for sitting with them, developing trust, answering their questions, helping them think through it. So I don't have there's no magic wand on this, but I do think making sure victims are part of our training and planning, maybe even having them go along. In some cases, for instance, I worked on a rather major serial sex offense case where we, after one victim had met with this fellow, we asked her if she'd be willing to talk to other victims who were considering it. She said yes, and that made quite a difference. So those are just a few ideas. But I think part of it is just helping them understand that there may be some benefits to them. One of the things we found from our research in our programs was that the reasons the victim said at the end they were glad they did it, by the way, when they do, most of them are glad they did it, was different than the reasons they gave for doing it in the first place. When the reasons they said they decided to do it were things like, I want to give them a piece of my mind, I want to get some questions answered, I want to make sure I get restitution. When they, after the meeting, they said, well, some of those things are important, but I really got to face up to this person, I faced the boogeyman, I found out who she or she really is instead of what I imagined. Sometimes they say, I think maybe I did some good. You know, victims really want to know that some good is going to come out of this terrible thing that happened to them. And the sense that maybe this person is less likely to do it again is a positive thing. I don't know if that's helpful. It's a challenge for many programs, but those are some of the things that we've experienced.
Thank you. Thank you, Howard. Other questions? Please don't be shy to get up and ask a question.
Let me say one more thing while you're thinking there. In New Zealand, what they have done is they offer victims to come to the meeting, that's the ideal, or they can send a representative, or they can send a letter, or they can video conference in. And so there's been some really significant ones where the victim wasn't willing to be present, but video conference in it was really positive. So part of it too is giving options on how people participate. It's hard to do in a circle process, I realize, but at least it gives some options.
Other questions? Can I ask a question? You talked a little bit about capacity and understanding that don't move too fast around putting this into place until you know you have the capacity to make that work. That's what I heard you saying, I think. And I'm wondering about how do communities, once they start building their models and putting it into practice, what are the best ways for them to evaluate this model to ensure that it is responding and respecting to their culture, to their communities, and to their people?
Okay, I think I understand that. If I didn't understand it right, you're correct. One of the things we found when we were starting up is it's important that everybody know that we're going to have a pilot phase, and then we're going to take stock after that. That puts people at ease, like referral sources and even board members, to know that it's going to be a pilot phase, and then we're going to take stock. One of the important ways to take stock is to have someone, sometimes from outside the community, or at least neutral, go back to the various people and interview them. Like, we found that really helpful. I've done that. For instance, there was a program in Kansas one time that they had me come out at that stage. And so I sat down with the judges, and I sat down with other people and asked them how things were going, and they would really appreciate the fact that they had a chance to take stock, to get some input, and to talk honestly with kind of a neutral party. So I think that's one way to do it. Our programs as a whole have often been too reluctant to be assessed, or to be evaluated. And I can understand that, but I think it's really important to do it. Sometimes you can use universities to do that kind of study. Sometimes it's just a question of asking someone who's neutral, not part of the process, to come in and just talk with people about what happened. I think that's one of the best ways, is just having someone come down and just ask them to reflect on how it's going, what they see the benefits, what the problems and challenges are, that kind of thing. Does that get to your question at all?
Yes, thank you. Any other comments, or, yes, one more.
Hi, Professor Zera. It's Christine Zacharioma. I'm one of the elected council chiefs from Mohawk Council Nawaway. I wanted to ask you, I'm glad your background is history, first of all. And second of all, I wanted to form a question. That's a question and a comment that refers to the Mohawk community. First of all, we have a widespread territory, and secondly, we've developed in history somewhat between our Mohawk communities, and yet we are also moving forward with respect to justice, to restorative justice, and yet some of the issues, some of the principles that we're trying to incorporate in our communities, I think, revolve around consensus, developing consensus, making sure that our communities are actually coming to consensus on the issue of restorative justice. I think it's a big challenge, and I'm wondering whether you can comment on challenges with respect to achieving consensus in communities where we have that basis in restorative justice to begin with, but understanding that we have that basis, understanding those principles, how do we get there? I hope this is clear to you in terms of...
Clear, but it's a hard question.
It's a hard question.
It's a hard question. Well, as I said, it gives up the talking. And probably some clarity on what you mean by consensus. One of the things that we've learned in my tradition from Quakers is the idea, they do everything by consensus, but they have when you do a vote, you do, yes, I'm agreeing with this, no, I'm not, or I'm not really crazy about it, but I won't stand in the way of it. So there's a third way that when you have a consensus, it doesn't mean that everybody's exactly on the same page, but people who are not exactly on the same page have agreed they don't want to stand in the way of moving ahead. Maybe you have those kind of techniques already. I don't know, I think a lot of it is language, being clear about language, being close to different ways of articulating it. John Braithwaite, a criminologist in Australia, has argued that one of the values of restorative justice is because it allows people to come together to resolve things, it allows for a lot of different philosophic orientations to exist together. There are some people who are more punitively oriented and some people who are not, so yet there may be room for all of that. And I feel like I don't have a very good answer for you. It's a hard question. And part of it is those people who are having struggling with the consensus is finding out exactly what's behind it. What are the needs behind it? What are the things behind the positions they're taking? I think that's so important. One of the things we learned from nonviolent communication is that to get at the need, what are the needs that this is trying, that you're trying to, that are behind what your position and what you're saying.
If I could just
another advice that I've seen very useful is letting people tell the stories of how they come to believe what they believe. For instance, Christian theologians are notorious for not getting along, right? So our university a few years ago had a retreat for theologians. But instead of talking theology, they went around the circle and each person told the story of how they were brought up, how they came to believe what they believed. And it ended up with a kind of people accepting each other in a way they'd never been before. Because as you well know, stories are so important. We are what our stories are, and narratives are. Narrative is so important. That was one device I've seen used to try to help people understand why they have a particular concept of justice.
And if I could just add this.
One little interesting technique to use in prison, developed by two students of mine that I've used in prison and various places, is you have people at tables of maybe 4, each with blank paper and crayons, and you tell, okay, each person has 3 minutes to draw their idea of justice. And then, after 3 minutes are up, pass it to the person on the left without talking. You look at the paper you received and make any changes you want to, and you go around the circle. And then at the end, you have a conversation at the table about what you were trying to accomplish in this picture and how you feel about what people did to your picture and so on. I found it really gets to some basic understandings of justice that we don't get to just by abstract conversations. I don't think this is helpful. It is a hard technique.
Okay, we've got someone who's coming back to the mic.
Just to say.
Same speaker.
I agree. I think what you stated just now, the importance of narrative, the importance of talking to each other, the importance of reviewing what are our principles from the very beginning to make sure that people understand where we come from, where we're going.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the key. Thank you.
I think it's key, yeah.
Thank you. Is there other questions? Comments people would like to make? Yes, one more. Please go to the...
Hello, Mr.
Hello. Okay, Howard.
Can you repeat your whole performance again? Was that good? Actually, I have a question. I just had a question, and this is a question that I think about a lot, is in your travels and in your experience, you talked about with the Maoris and the Navajo Nation. Are those systems that those indigenous systems that you had experience with, are those part of an existing mainstream system, or are they independent systems?
Well, the Navajo, as I understand it, have the right, at least in certain kinds of, have their own courts, and in certain kinds of cases, they're able to just handle totally. I think that may be a little different than most groups in the U.S. In New Zealand, it's part of the legal system. That is, the legal system said that youth justice, only the youth justice is set up this way. But the police are told that 80% of the cases you shouldn't even bring to the legal system at all, because the legal system is just going to make things worse. And those serious cases, except for murder and manslaughter, are supposed to go to this family group conference. The family group conference is going to include the so-called offender and family members. All the family members they can round up. If they can't find family members, they'll find virtual family, somebody important to the person. The victim and any people they want to bring, a police officer, because in New Zealand the police officers are one bringing the charges, and probably a youth advocate, a lawyer, a special lawyer. And they are supposed to decide, they talk first of all about what the victim, what happened to the victim and what they need. And then they talk about what's happening in this young offender's life and what they need. And so the plan has 2 parts, or 3 parts really. It has the part, the restitution, the plan for making things right for the victim. Secondly is the plan for the so-called offender and what should be done. And third is how it's going to be monitored to make sure it's complete. And that's supposed to be the way the system works. If they can't decide that, if they can't get it in, then it goes to court. But even if it goes to court, it always comes back to a family that comes. It's not, the process itself was inspired by Maori, but it's not a Maori system. Maori will tell you, this is not our system. But it's supposed to be culturally appropriate. So that my friend, who's not alive anymore, was a practitioner in New Zealand, he was Pākehā, European, but when he had Maori people involved, if they're both sides of Maori, he would have a Maori elder run the process. He would sit in. He was a government employee, he had to sit in, make sure it was okay, but a Maori elder would run it. If a Maori family and a Pākehā family were there, he would negotiate them. There would probably be a Maori elder there to give a reading, the various cultural elements like that. The idea is that the process is an encounter, but you're supposed to make it culturally appropriate. Now, the Maori have been asking, when they're Maori on Maori cases, to do it, be able to take it back to the marae, the community center, and do it themselves. And I think there's been some progress with that. But the government has been reluctant to give up that power, and so that's been a source of tension with Maori. But that, so what it does, it's the only Western legal system I know where restorative process is a default. Court is the backup, but the default, the norm, is a restorative process. And I find that really inspiring. There's a program in California being used in a number of states that's inspired by that, where they are working with pretty serious crimes. They have an agreement with the prosecutor, with the Crown, as you would say in Canada, where they can be totally diverted, and they can give what they call reverse Miranda warning. In other words, instead of saying anything you say will be used against you, they're able to say anything you say will not be used against you. And they're having phenomenal results, very low recidivism rates, victim satisfaction. It's a really interesting model, and they are working up some material about how that model works. If you're interested, I can put you in touch with that.
Hi, Howard. It's Joyce again. A lot of times we deal with conflict of interest. In the Western world, it's very prescriptive about conflict of interest, about not having nepotism, but in the traditional world, you do work with family. Your family member, you can hire your family. You can work with your clan mothers and your relatives to accomplish something. So we're dealing with that and trying to figure out how to resolve this so that we can bring the two worlds together. But right now, conflict of interest, there's certain rules that you just can't do. I'm wondering if you come across this.
We know the Western jury system originally was like that. The idea of the original jury was to have people in the community who know the folks to help bring some human, some knowledge to the thing. And of course, it's all been scripted now. You're not supposed to know what people, you're not supposed to know anything about the case, and so forth. Yeah, I know that's been an issue. So again, I think that's one of the ways that having a specially trained lawyer present in some of these cases, I think that's partly why the Maori do it. I mean, New Zealand does it the way they do it. By having an attorney there who's not an adversarial attorney, but an attorney to watch for due process, to watch for conflict of interest, and so forth. That might be one way to address that. In our cases, when we first started doing this in Indiana in the 70s, we were doing it mostly at that point referrals from the judge. The judge was sentencing people, saying, I'd like you to make restitution, go work it out with this victim offender comedy process. We then would come with an agreement, and the judge would have to sign off on the agreement. And then they almost always did, but it was a check on things to make sure it wasn't out of line. That was another effort to try to build in these things. It would be interesting, Northern Ireland has really adopted restorative justice, but they've had a lot of the same kind of issues because of the loyalist and Republican community and so forth being so close-knit. It would be kind of interesting to talk to them about how they're addressing that. I've never thought about that, but they might be a source of some information. But again, the only good idea I have really that I think might be a good idea is having an attorney there. Part of the job is just to watch for that and correct for it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Howard. We've got time for at least one more question or comment. Yes.
I just wanted to hypothetically think about Canada and their pronouncements on the Truth and Reconciliation. But it seems like they don't know how to do it. So they're struggling right now on figuring out how to reconcile. Would this help them? These models?
I think it could. You should really know. My colleague Carl Stopper, who spent 16 years in South Africa and worked with Truth and Reconciliation, came back with a lot of insight into that. Part of the problem with some of these Truth and Reconciliation Commissions is they're fairly top-down. But I think there are things to be learned from these processes about the importance of people sharing their story. The trauma part, I think, is really helpful. I think these processes really need to be grounded in understanding the trauma. I think there would be some things to learn, but Carl will be able to answer that question better than I. And you know, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa came to use the language of restorative justice, but it wasn't fully restorative at all. And one of the ways it wasn't is that they did not. Carl was part of a group of practitioners who went to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and offered their services when individual victims and offenders would be willing to meet. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission did not take them up on it. And as a result, there were some really horror stories. There was one offender who felt so bad he went back to the township to apologize without any structure at all, and he was murdered when he got in there. There's all kinds of this. I talked to the journalists, the MCs on the radio. I was there several times during PRC, and they said victims and offenders would call in and talk together on the phone on their radio show because they had no other way to do it. So one thing is learning how to translate this down to individual meetings where that needs to happen. In general, yeah, I think there are things to be learned. Again, I don't know that I'm the one with the expertise to answer that, but I think there are. But I do think the understanding of trauma is so important. I remember, the New Zealand had these justice commissions that were looking into land claims by Maori, historical land claims, and I talked to a head judge who was overseeing that one time, and he was talking about they were stuck, and I said, what's missing here is an understanding of trauma. And so he came to our program and sat through the training on that, to be able to incorporate the trauma part. So I haven't followed your TRC very well, but I would guess there are things to learn from all of this.
Okay, thank you so much, Howard, Zir, for your very interesting discussion around restorative justice models and sharing the various Indigenous models that are around the world that could very well help to support the development of these models here in Canada. Thank you for letting us know about the bottom line philosophy, the principles and the values that have created these and have made them successes. And for giving us those 7 stages, those 7 steps that are sort of essential to ensuring that that these models will succeed in their visions. So thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us today. I hope you're in better weather than we are, and we wish you all the best.
Sounds like we are. The sunshine. It's cold here, but we only have a couple inches of snow and the sun is shining. So.
Thank you.
Best wishes with the rest of your deliberation.
The court panel, who we have together, and luckily they've made it through the storm to present to us this afternoon. So how this will work is the panel will have an opportunity to have opening remarks and presentations each, and then we will leave time at the end for question and answer from the crowd. So I would like to first, I'd like to say we have Judge Carrie Garrow and Michaela Horn, is it Michaela? Got it, great. From St. Regis Mohawk Tribal Court, as well as Justice of the Peace Kevin Flesher. No? Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, Director of Justice Services from the Mohawk Court of Kahnawake. Bonnie Cole, who is legal counsel, and Gilbert Terrence, who is court administrator from Akwesasne Court. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves in terms of their positions, and I'd like to start first with Judge Garrow.
So good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us. My name is Carrie Garrow. I'm here from Akwesasne, and I have my law degree. And I worked in the court system here back in 2000, then went to Syracuse University, taught for several years, and ran the Indian Law Center there. And have recently moved home to work full-time in the court again as the Chief Judge, starting in July. So thank you for inviting me. I'm going to just briefly talk a little bit about Healing to Wellness Courts in general, and then Michaela will tell you more in specifics about our Healing to Wellness Court. So I've been fortunate enough to work with Healing to Wellness Courts since about 2000, when I went to my first training of trainers, and have done a lot of technical assistance and training for Healing to Wellness Courts for Indian nations in the States. So just to give you a basic understanding, so the state courts began a movement towards using drug courts because they realized that it's more cost-effective to work with people who have addictions when they're in the criminal justice system than to simply send them to jail and recycle them. They get out, they commit more crimes and come back. So they began, I believe it was in the 80s, to run what we call drug courts, which essentially is someone who is in the criminal justice system, and there is a team that is very different from your normal adversarial system, where the judge actually works with a team of individuals, the prosecutor, the public defender, rehabilitation people, addiction services, and uses a team approach and uses sanctions and incentives to assist this person to address their addiction problems. So when the Indian nations, particularly a lot of the judges, began to go to some of the trainings for drug courts, they realized that what the state courts were doing, or very much what we used to do traditionally, is work with people to rehabilitate them. But the way the state court systems were doing it was not working very well in tribal courts. The state courts, they have 10 key components that focus on a phase system where individuals always get drug tested, come to court all the time. It's a much more user-friendly system, but there wasn't any focus on culture and spirituality. And so a lot of the trainers and people, tribal court judges, got together and wrote our own key components to base our drug courts on, and also renamed it to Healing to Wellness, because that's what they felt. This was a path, this was a journey as a person battled their addiction problems. And so the Healing to Wellness courts, we have now our own 10 key components, and as I often do trainings, our Healing to Wellness courts, ours are actually harder than state courts because we focus on culture and spirituality. And essentially, it's where you bring a team of individuals together, usually overseen by the judge. You have a coordinator, and Michaela is our coordinator, who keeps the team rallied together, which sometimes is like herding cats. And typically you have, sometimes you have attorneys there. Not all models have attorneys on your team, but you'll also have typically mental health, and then also your substance abuse counselors, probation officers, case managers, and anyone else that the team feels is appropriate. Sometimes you might have a cultural person, you might have an elder in the community. It's really up to the team and each court and nation to decide how they want to run their teams. But typically you meet together once a week and work with these individuals using sanctions and incentives, because you're helping these people to learn accountability. And it's very different, you know, typically a judge is used to maybe hearing from the attorneys and then making a decision, whereas we work on a team basis where we sit around the table and the team will discuss a specific person. Let's say perhaps they tested positive that week for alcohol, and we might have a discussion, okay, where are they in their progress? Should they be further along and should be testing positive for alcohol? And what sort of sanction. We'll also talk about, you know, this person has been doing really well, let's give them some sort of incentive. There's been a lot of research on state drug courts, unfortunately not on tribal healing to wellness courts, that guides us and helps us and talks about how it's better to work with incentives rather than to discipline people as they're dealing with their addiction issues. So it's a very different setting than your typical adversarial Western type model of court system. It's not adversarial at all. I hear participants talk a lot about how coming to Healing to Wellness Court is very different, where the judge is actually most of the time friendly. And spends a lot of time talking with them, and actually that's one of the best practices, is that the judge spends a lot of time. And actually the research shows you have to spend, you know, if you're not spending more than 3 minutes talking to that participant in the court hearing, then you're not doing your job well enough. And we talk everything from whether or not the person is, how they're doing in their counseling, perhaps where they are in rebuilding some of their relationships or anything else that's happening in their lives. And it's amazing to watch these participants regain their lives. It's a hard job because you're dealing with people with hard issues, and it can be very heart-rending at times. But I have to say, it's wonderful coming home to work with our Healing to Wellness Court, because having done a lot of the training around the country, we actually have the only international Healing to Wellness Court at least in the States. And so it's great to see all of our service providers on both sides of the territory come together and work with these participants. And most of our participants have legal issues on both sides of the border. And so it's phenomenal to work with these team members who are very dedicated. So with that, I'll let Michaeli tell you about our process.
Thank you, Judge Garrow. So my name is Michaeli Horn. I am Bear Clan, and I've been born and raised in the community of Akwesasne my entire life. I started off with social work. I have a social work degree, and then I decided to go back to school and got my bachelor's in psychology. And then the bills needed to get paid. I needed a job that was steady. This came up, and I was like, well, give it a shot. We'll see what happens. I was flabbergasted that I was given a phone call the next day, and the judge at the time said, "You're hired." So my first day on the job, he handed me a very large stack of papers and said, "Build me a program." So after I got done having a panic attack, I started doing as much research and learning about wellness courts as possible. It makes sense to me as a person, as a Native person, as a community member, that we take care of our own. And nobody else can take care of us like we take care of ourselves, right? So we have a very unique community here. As everybody in the audience knows, we have the international border, we have different provinces, we have New York State, and then on top of all that, jurisdiction is a nightmare here. So we've been very lucky to build the team that we have to support the program that we have in place here. We have a very unique team, specifically because of the area geographically that we're in. In addition to having our judge, there's myself. We have an assistant U.S. attorney who is in the federal system, because often we have young people coming across the border acting as mules for substances or people, doesn't matter what, but they're coming across the border and often getting caught at customs. So that is an automatic federal charge. So we've actually had at least one individual come through from the federal system, which is pretty much unheard of. We are the first program in the States to have this opportunity given to us to work with somebody who was being diverted from the federal system. And if anybody knows anything about the U.S. government, sometimes it can be a little bit challenging to work with them. But we have a very, really good relationship with our U.S. attorney, and She just really wants to be included, wants to be involved, and is willing to do whatever she can to try and work with us. In addition to that, we have the only Native inpatient residential services located on Native territory east of the Mississippi. So we have our treatment providers that run the program at Partridge House who sit on the wellness court team with us, in addition to our outpatient services, mental health services, and then we reached out to Mohawk Council because we have people who live or work or commit crimes on both sides of the border. So we needed to have representation and support from both sides. So it was really important to us to be able to get somebody from Mohawk Council, and thankfully we've gotten some representation from the Justice Program and from the Police Department to be able to help us help our community more effectively. One of the really good things about having this partnership with Mohawk Council has been to help curb border jumping. You know, people committing crimes on the American side and then going and hiding out in Canada, or committing crimes in Canada and then hiding out in the States. We want to make sure that all the charges are answered, fines and fees are taken care of, that nobody's really hiding, because we have families on both sides of the border, and to be able to freely cross to visit people, family, friends, to be able to go out to eat, because most of the good food is in Canada, especially around here. So going out to the movies, to be able to go out and just be a social person, you know, maybe to go out on a date or something like that. It's really important to have our people be able to have that ability to cross the border without or with little hassle. So our wellness court team meets on Thursdays before court. We discuss, you know, participants' place in the program, progress, stumbling blocks, anything that they may have come across. We've had a number of people really express their gratitude at being involved in the program. It's not always easy, because in the first phase of the program, I'm in contact with everyone daily, Monday to Sunday, at least one phone call a day. Drug testing is a minimum of 3 times a week, and we don't stray from that unless there's weather like this. But we build a good, strong relationship with the individual. We have a pretty good idea of what their needs are and how to best to help them. And by keeping everybody in the loop, we avoid the participants' ability to split people. So if anybody is dealing with Department of Social Services, if they're telling their DSS caseworker one thing and then telling me something different, me and the caseworker are eventually going to talk and find out for sure what's going on with this individual. And that, you know, if they're trying to split, like basically splitting staff, you know, we're going to find out. So it's a way of increasing accountability. It is challenging at times. It is very rewarding work, though. I actually just had a participant say, "Thank you for drug testing me as often as you do." Who could imagine that you would actually have somebody say, "Thank you for testing me"? It's not fun. You know, I come in on the weekends, I come in at nights, I try and make myself as available as possible to my participants, because that's the best thing to help, you know, show that I'm interested, I'm available, and I'm not doing this just to come in and collect a paycheck. You know, there's a lot of heart and passion that goes into my work. And it can be very challenging, but very rewarding, and that's the big thing. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask me after we've gotten through everybody else. So thank you. Pass the microphone.
Hello everyone, very nice to be here. It's been a long time since I've been in this area, so I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to have been invited. My name is Kevin Fleischer, and I'm from the Mohawk territory of Ganawagi. That's where I live. I'm a Turtle Clan. Right now I'm the Director of Justice Services for Ganawagi, and also the Chairperson of the Ganawagi Justice Commission. So in those positions I do a lot of work with our Court of Ganawagi and our Restorative Justice Program, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about right now. The Court of Ganawagi, as it is right now, is essentially a Section 107 Indian Act court. We have justices of the peace appointed under the Indian Act, who hear primarily Indian Act laws, Part 27 criminal code offenses, you know, traffic issues, some assault, smaller items like that. along with other laws like our election law. So it's a very limited, I guess we call it like scope in terms of what it can hear, which has led to some problems for us. There's about maybe 3 to 4 court sessions per month in traffic and criminal cases, roughly 40 in the past year or so. The court is, I think, is very well run, and I'm very proud of our court. It's our court, but that doesn't mean that it's perfect. Things can always be improved, and that's what Kahnawake has been working towards. Some of the problems we've seen with the court and we've acted to rectify is this limited scope of jurisdiction. We have many community laws that our own court can't hear. We need to fix that. We have justices of the peace sitting there when justices of the peace are no longer appointed in Canada. And there was concern that when our 2 justices of the peace retire, or if they become incompetent, or if they pass away, what have you, that we'll no longer have anyone to hear any cases at the Court of Kahnawake, and all the files will have to be moved elsewhere. So in response to issues like this, work was undertaken about 7 years ago or so on developing a Kahnawake Justice Act, where we'd create a homegrown Kahnawake court that would be empowered to hear all our laws and a whole bunch of other things too. So the purpose of this Justice Act, which was enacted in June of 2015, was to institute the judicial forms that we need to adjudicate and interpret laws applicable in the territory in order to maintain peace, order, and justice. So it's our court for our land to hear our laws. And that was enacted in June 2015, and since then there's been a lot of work undertaken on actually implementing this Justice Act. Our Justice Act sets out 4 judicial forms. There is our restorative justice program, Skana Ozunda, which is focuses on ADR and restorative justice practices, mediation, talking circles, those sorts of things. And the intent of this program is for people to have the opportunity to resolve conflict in a peaceful, non-adversarial way. So we're integrating traditional elements into our justice system with this program. It plays a key role in our justice system right now and in our Justice Act. It is prominently mentioned and is one of the cornerstones of our justice system, because before anybody goes to court or does anything else, they really should be going through this program first. In a best case scenario, they never get to court. They resolve it in this peaceful, non-adversarial way and come to a mutual agreement. But we know the reality, sometimes that doesn't always happen. So the second judicial forum is what I call the new Court of Kahnawake, which will have judges confirmed by the community, and will have a much wider scope than the present day Justice of the Peace Court. The new Court of Kahnawake, once fully implemented, is going to be the court of general inherent jurisdiction for all civil, criminal, and penal issues in the community. And this is a very wide jurisdiction. It might take many years until that actually comes to be. This new court, once implemented, is also going to have what is called the superintending and reforming power over all other Kahnawake courts, administrative tribunals, public and private bodies established by Kahnawake law. What this means is that it will have the power to judicially review decisions made by pretty much every other decision maker in the community except for our Court of Appeal. So it's going to be a very powerful court once implemented, and that's what we're working towards doing. Another part of our Kahnawake Justice Act is that we're going to have an administrative tribunal. And this tribunal is going to review decisions of different public bodies to determine if it was reasonable, if there's been absence of bias, if procedural fairness has been followed. It will also hear private matter disputes between people and public order issues. Say, for instance, if there is a Kahnawake law setting out minimum wages and somebody's being underpaid, that's a public order issue. They could take it to the administrative tribunal and adjudicate it there. So our administrative tribunal is going to look a little bit like a court. There's going to be an adjudicator making a decision. There's probably going to be lawyers involved and rules and all that, but it's intended to be more efficient, cheaper, and a more expeditious way really to attain justice. Instead of going through the whole court process, you could go through this other sort of court process. The other form instituted by our Justice Act is the Ganawage Court of Appeal. As a Ganawage, we like to go big. If we're going to have a court, we have a Court of Appeal, we have everything. And that's going to really review decisions of the Court of Ganawage. Again, these are all like sort of under development right now. So present day, we have our Section 107 Court of Ganawage, but that's going to be changing though. And that's something I like to see with a lot of communities, for other communities to look at what they're doing now and say, well, what actually works best for us? Maybe we need to change what we're doing. And that's what Ganawage did and we're working towards. So if anyone has any questions along the way, by all means, let me know and I'll do my best to answer. Thank you.
My name is Gilbert Torrance. I'm the court administrator at Akwesasne on the Cornwall Island side. And we have court once a month, 11 times a year, ranging with a docket of 30 to 50 per month, and on a budget of a little less than $250,000. I'm here to give you an idea of what it's been like to run a court, an inherent right court that was formerly a Section 107 Indian Act court. And the court has been battling with finances, obviously, and but it's imperative, I feel, that the court gets its main source of funding from its own source funding. That way there's no fear that the outside governments will shut the court down. However, the basic funding of a couple $100,000 is in no way the total cost of the court. The total cost would probably go in the millions. What's been subsidizing the different programs that revolve around the primary structure of the court are usually provincially and then some federally run programs. For instance, our Akwesasne Justice Strategy program is a provincially funded program. We have Section 81 and 84, which are parole-based federal programs, also contributing. There's other programs that are run within the justice program, which are subsidize the court in the legislative development. In the past, Akwesasne laws were, the dispute mechanisms were spread all over the place. Some went to a council of elders, some went to various appeal tribunals. So what we thought, in order for transparency and less confusion, is that most of them will now come to the court. And so we've been active with the community and the legislative development to make sure that inside the new laws that a lot of the dispute mechanisms be directed to our court. We're 98, 99% civil law-based. Now, I went to law school thinking, I want to lay off prison guards because the prison system seems to be subsidized by the number of natives attending. So if I can decrease the number of natives attending and get the number of prison guards laid off, I will have accomplished my goal. However, being 99% in the civil law aspect, I'm not going to be laying off any prison guards very soon. Civil law is non-criminal law. So my feeling is we have to use the civil law to train ourselves, to prepare ourselves for the next step, which would be to jump into the criminal law aspect. We don't have jails, so that's the other challenge to this. So, but we do have resources in the community. Resources that are cultural, resources that have been here for quite a long time. A lot of drug and alcohol programming, and a lot of talent, a lot of ceremonial talent, and artistic talent. I want to draw upon those to get rid of different aspects of bail, warrants, all in the criminal area. However, we're getting our teeth wet with the civil law. The non-criminal aspect of being a court. So the faster we get our teeth wet, the faster we can jump into the criminal aspect and turn our courts into courts that can make a real impact on decreasing the native populations in our jail. Because ultimately, that's what we're all here for. And whenever you hear court, people right away associate that with crime. So that's, I'll talk more about that later, but here's Bonnie.
Thanks, Gil. Bonnie Cole, as I mentioned earlier, I'm the prosecutor in the Akwesasne Court. I also work in the Justice Department and for the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne as legal counsel. I've been there in that capacity for 5 years. Prior to that, believe it or not, my prior history has been working in long-term care for quite a number of years. So I think it gives me a good grounding in terms of some of the principles and values that that we try to put into place when we're talking about our court system. I'm going to talk a little bit more, I think, about principle-based values and such, and talk about that in relation to our court more so. And that's what I prepared here. Clicker work. There we go. So I know there's not much time, and I know we won't have time for questions, but I just need to take a look here so I don't lose my train of thought. Just a quick overview is about our court, what the current climate is, a little bit about inherent right. I want to talk a little bit about our Akwesasne court law principles and some restorative tools. Now, this is something that I stole from Jim, but he's not here, so I'll give him credit for it. I stole it from one of his presentations. I thought it was really good. I work on another table with our Director of Economic Development and Environment, but it's applicable across the board when we're dealing with services and programs in our communities, and particularly also in justice. The landscape right now for a lot of us in the communities is that things are taking shape, and the timing for things to happen is now. And this is a message that I've been repeatedly saying, is that we have events that have happened in the past few years, such as the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that has been recently adopted by Canada, or what did they say? They removed their objector status. So I don't know what that means exactly, but we're working through figuring that out. We also recently, there was the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, and then the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. What does this have to do with us? Well, it has a lot to do with us. All of these things are fundamental documents and reports and findings and recommendations that are shaping not only us or Canada, but it's pointing a direction to the world, really, to the world, to all of us. And what it's saying, and the message that we should be taking from it and from everywhere else, is that the time to make change is now. Everything in these things, when you read them, tells you that. So, for example, Article 5 of the UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, talks about Indigenous people having the right to maintain and strengthening their distinct political, legal, economic, social, cultural institutions. It's a right. It's not a here. Let's give it to you if you feel like it. It's your right. Truth and Reconciliation, another example. Call to action number 42. This is a call. This is a recommendation on the governments to commit to the recognition and implementation of Aboriginal justice systems in a manner consistent with treaty and Aboriginal rights of Aboriginal peoples and the Constitution and so on. So the thing is that it's time, you know, and all of these winds are blowing, and everything that's happening is pointing us in that direction. One of the other messages, though, that I've said to different groups that I've spoken to in the past while is that it isn't just incumbent on our governments, on Canada or on anybody else to do these things. It's also incumbent on us as individuals to take those messages and take them to heart. You know, we can't stand around anymore and say, what are you guys going to do for us? That can't happen. It's up to us to take that to heart and to take that role and to take that lead, whatever that is, and do it for ourselves. Now, I know we've got a limited amount of time here, so I need to run quickly. Looking at the Akwesasne Court, the Akwesasne Court is exactly what it is. It's an inherent right court. We've had a long history, and there's been a lot of good people like Brian David, and there's people in this room who've had a hand in the development of our court system and our justice system to this day. It isn't just Gil and I. There's been a lot of people that have put a lot of thought and sweat and thinking into developing everything that you see in your packages and in the toolkits here. The Akwesasne Court, I can't say that enough, that we see that and that's the way it is. This is the exercise of our inherent right. We don't go around asking anybody, say, do we have your approval? Do we have yours? And do we, no, this is just the way it is. This is our court and this is what we're going to do here. And this is how we're going to do it. And if we choose not to do criminal stuff right now till we feel comfortable doing X civil laws, we'll do that. But we're going to dictate the terms and decide for ourselves as a community how this is going to unfold. The other thing is that in the Akwesasne Court and in our court law, which formalizes our court, is that looking at restoring balance to the person and to the community using traditional values and methods and systems. One of the tricks, of course, is this idea of merging two worlds, you know, and that's hard because, you know, we're always trying to keep in mind that, you know, Richard is talking about the two-row wampum this morning, you know, that we're never supposed to interfere with one another. Well, you know, sometimes we have to talk to each other to say that this is the way we're going and this is the way Canada or mainstream or Ontario, whoever is going. So we've kind of looked at these values and we have to integrate some other concepts, but we've done that out of a sense that we're trying to put together a system that makes sense in its modern day form. When you look into our court law, and it's all available on the web for you to download and to look at and to print and to read at your leisure, it's based on the principles of Skena, Kasastansa, Ganakoligo, the same values and messages that you heard this morning from Richard. We talk about those values and that our justices, and not just our justices, but all of the people in our court must use those principles when they're thinking. So when Gil and I are sitting there talking about regulations or talking about something in our court, it's always challenging ourselves to think differently, to think about these principles and think about the person we're talking about. Again, the values are guided by respect for life, respect for person, being, and respect for property. All in our court law. Some of the concepts we integrated is, you know, these are more Western ideas, is judicial independence, making sure that, you know, we have justices who oversee the court, that there's some level of judicial independence there. Our court is a court of competent jurisdiction. It will give you charter remedies, it will hear other matters. And we have natural justice concepts integrated into it. So the idea that people will always have a fair hearing, that they'll have representation, that they'll know what is being heard or charged against them, those types of things. And I talked about mentioning restorative tools, and these are just many tools that our justice system uses We have mediation services that's offered through the court, through the Akwesasne Court. That doesn't mean that the court approves all those services. It just means it's a service we offer to anybody in our community that has a dispute that wants it to be resolved. You don't have to necessarily have an offense to come to our court. It could be something as simple as a couple wanting to settle a child custody matter. It can be that simple. We do that. We use our Naganagodeo Council for, of course, many of the diversions, pre and post. In the court law, you're going to see many remedies that are available, and I use this term in the justice's toolbox. So they're not limited to just a fine or this. There's many things that they can do. So if they have somebody before them and there's a remedy to be prescribed, it doesn't have to be a fine. It can be anything. It can be community service. It could be having them teach a class. It could have them do some sort of restitution. It's wide open and varied. But it'll be based on looking at that individual before them to restore them and restore the harm that was done. The one thing I want to say about the court law, which solidifies our court, is that it's flexible. And one of the things that when it was being drafted was that there was always this talk about making sure that it was flexible enough to change over the course of time and to leave it open to other possibilities. So it was drafted that way with intent. So one of the clauses you'll see in there is there's an ability to enter into protocols with the tribe and with the Mohawk Nation, if that day ever came. And the reason for that is because some people in our community would feel more comfortable having their issues resolved in a different way rather than in the court system we have or our forum. They may feel better having it resolved in a method that Richard described this morning between, planning. So it's always that possibility, it's a flexibility that we've kept. Anyway, that's a lot to say in a very short time. I don't want to say too much more, but if you want to see the law itself, just link to the registry. You can download it there. And I posted our email addresses there if you wanted to contact us for other things. And I don't know how much time for questions.
Thanks so much, Bonnie. Thank you so much to the panel as a whole for providing us with more practical details about these models and how they're being rolled out and how they're working in your communities. So I'd like to first, before we open it up for questions, first give you applause. Okay, so we have these experts sitting here. I'm sure there's some questions and some clarity or maybe some ideas that people have that they'd like to share with the crowd. I'd like to open up the floor. Yes, Steve.
For the Healing to Wellness work, because you're jumping jurisdictions, and I know that other First Nations will be looking at that, there's different jurisdictions. How are you able to cross over and get help from the other side? Was it a formal agreement? Did you have to work with the council, or what exactly do you suggest for this?
I'm a little soft-spoken unless I'm really upset. I'm yelling at a participant, and then the judge can hear me down the hall. So that was really just, our previous judge kind of just reached out and said, we need to do something. And it was pretty much just acknowledging that we need to work together because we are one community. It doesn't matter that there's an international border there. We didn't put it there. This is one community. We need to work together. So our governments, I don't really know that there was a lot of thought behind it, just kind of, we reached out, people responded, and we were able to get some people on board. And it kind of made the rounds. We had a few people come and sit with us a couple different times, and maybe they weren't just the right fit, or maybe their position wasn't the most appropriate for them to be joining us on the team. So it was really kind of, we were very glad to get the two people that are sitting with us now, or that are working with us now, that they were able and willing and in just the right position at the right time. We don't have an MOU with anyone, but we probably should, get something like that hammered out, just so that if there's a change in administration, maybe a change in position, we should have those kind of things already laid out, so that any new person coming in can kind of look back and have a good idea of what it is that we're doing, and be able to know who to call and talk to and ask questions of.
So if I can just quickly follow up, we also, as we have worked with MCA and their departments, we also work with our town and county courts, and most of our participants come from there because, like MCA, we're not exercising criminal jurisdiction. And so we work with our town judges, and they'll refer people who have been charged with misdemeanors. Many are already on probation, and as a term of their probation, they come and participate in our Healing to Wellness Court, or they might also be referred from the county family court and have perhaps neglect case filed against them. And so as part of their plan, they'll come work with us. So it's really, and Michele's right, we don't have a lot of MOUs. Most of our relationships have been a handshake and finding the right person. But certainly a best practice would be, if you're thinking about doing this, is definitely an MOU, and whether it's even working within our own tribal government and their departments. And that way the court outlasts the wonderful people we have in the team.
And as a follow-up question, for the First Nations that are here, they're looking at an Indigenous justice system and perhaps trying to have a court in their First Nation. So I'm wondering if all of you can talk about the funding
that you have or do not have, please.
Do you want to take this one?
I can start. So we have funding from our tribal government. We also have funding from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They have a certain amount of funding that comes to tribal courts and also law enforcement, as well as other programs. A lot of our funding comes from federal grants that we will apply for during the grant cycle. So we have a lot of, at least probably 3 different sources of our funding.
We have also recently started a family treatment court, so working with parents who have had a neglect or abuse petition filed against them in family court. And the funds for that actually came from a Department of Health and Human Services grant, which was focused on court improvement projects. It was very unique, and I don't know like really how we found it. Our previous judge actually handed me the paper for it, and that's actually one way that we kind of get started. It gives us a little bit of seed money, maybe to buy some more expensive equipment, and then once the grant funds are gone, we pretty much just fall under our regular court budget, and that's really outlined by what Judge Garrett has already mentioned.
The Court of Ganawage is largely, probably pretty much 100% funded by the Mohawk Council of Ganawage. Our restorative justice program does receive funding from Quebec and Canada, and they cover most of the costs for it. They don't give enough, I think, but they do give a large portion of it. The issue with funding, and I have to agree with my colleague here when it comes to receiving funding from outside sources, is that it's great to receive funding, someone else pay the bill, but you don't want to be beholden to anybody. You don't want to be getting money in and then be limited in what you can or can't do with it. So funding's great from external sources, but you need to be able to proceed in a way that benefits your community without having to worry about any other sort of agreements or anything else.
Like I said earlier, it's roughly a couple $100,000, and the fines and court costs maybe offset that 30 to 50,000. And then we have summer student applications to help. We got various conferences we put on, and We try to draw our administration materials from those budgets. We've lately been soliciting volunteers from the local law societies, whether it's at McGill University or University of Ottawa. So we've been trying to do as much as we possibly can with the budget we have. The downfalls of the budget over the years have been a high turnover. The deficit situation that we sometimes create for the Mohawk Council. But I think in the end, the benefits far outweigh the negatives when it comes to this type of endeavor.
Other questions? Sure, go ahead. Just speak up if you can, we don't have the microphone.
Okay, so I think it might have touched on this a bit for the Healing Wellness Court, or Healing Wellness Court.
So I'm wondering, how do you enforce your court orders, and under what legislative or authority do you do that? And I'm seeing that this court, the Akwesasne Court, has Akwesasne Court Justice Act. Is that what it was? So I don't know if that's where that is, what kind of authority that is, or basically how do you get the provinces or the feds, or in your case, the states, to recognize your court orders?
So I think our Healing to Wellness Court is a little bit unique. There are a couple others like ours that work in collaboration with their town and county courts. So the way that we work is because the individuals, and I'll focus mostly on our adult criminal, because they're on probation in the town court most of the time. Typically what will happen is most of the only interaction that we might have with the town court once they're in our program, there's usually a lot of collaboration beforehand, talking back and forth about whether or not this person fits our program, our court. Typically though, the town court may then only hear about us if we're successful, and it could take over a year to complete the program, or if we end up terminating them because they're just not able to follow our policies and procedures and instructions. And typically the town court that we're very fortunate to work with, they simply respect our decision that we're terminating this person, and then the person will go back and have their probation hearing it, and then the judge will decide whether or not, what sort of sentence to impose. More often than not, the person will go to jail. And our Healing to Wellness Court operates through a tribal council resolution, which was first obtained when Judge Hearn first started it up under the first grant. The tribal council passed a tribal council resolution acknowledging that the court was being created, and we have our policies and procedures. When we deal with our other cases and recognition of court orders, that's actually something that we've been working on. We're very fortunate. We participate in and have been participating since its creation, the New York State Federal Tribal, New York Federal State Tribal Court Forum, where we all get together, state court judges, usually representatives from the federal government, and representatives from the nations in New York. And we work on issues such as that, recognition of orders. New York State has now, the court system now has a rule, we call it the comedy rule, where they'll recognize our tribal court orders. We recently, we do child support cases. We were very excited to have one of our child support orders recognized by a court in Ontario, because no surprise, some of our dads live in Ontario. So, and I know our child support department is working on the courts in Quebec, getting that recognized as well.
And
And the only other time we might have any contact with the Bombay Town Court is actually if we're seeking a sanction. We usually do that through probation because we're not a sentencing court. We don't have criminal jurisdiction. So we actually petition probation. He's usually on court as well because I have a really good relationship with our probation officer. So he knows what's going on. So if we're looking at doing a sanction of jail for a short period of time, we usually do that through probation.
Just before I go, further to your question, that's the sort of issue too that we've identified in Ganawage as we work towards implementing our Justice Act is, although we have an inherent right to create our court, we don't live in a vacuum or an island or whatever the metaphor is. We know that when the time comes when there's a judgment and someone wants to execute and it needs to be enforced, we know we need relationships with external parties. If someone has a civil judgment and an attempt is made to seize a bank account, we don't want to go there and have people say, what the heck is this thing? It don't matter. So, you know, as inherent as courts may be, you still need to have some sort of reciprocal arrangements with the outside just for things to function properly.
Most of the internal laws, the enforcement arm would be the compliance officers of the Mohawk Council with backup from the Akwesasne Mohawk Police. The external order, interestingly, is one of the issues at the forefront of our discussions with the provincial counterparts and the federal. The federal government just a couple of years ago approved a matrimonial real property law that has built into the law of our court as the dispute court of competent jurisdiction. And so under the couples property law or matrimonial real property law, there's a wide range of orders that now, once they're ordered in that court, have to be enforced externally. For instance, garnishment of wages, say in other matters in that law, we would need the court clerk in Ontario, the court clerk in Quebec, to take those orders and run it through their system so that those orders would be just as valid in the outside jurisdictions as in our community.
Yeah, in addition to what Gil is saying, is that there's a couple of other things that we do as well. We have, of course, you know, we do have the, like many of you do, we do have the sanction programs of the provincial government, federal government, you know, the probation, parole, the diversion programs, and you have those remedies under those programs for enforcement. But in terms of enforcement of orders, again, as Gil said, you know, that's something that we would have our discussions with outside on. One of the other things that we do have here in our community, though, is that we have what we call good standing policy, which means that if you come before the court and you are found guilty and you are fined and you don't pay your fine, that makes you ineligible for some services of counsel until you come into good standing. So, you know, we don't withhold necessary services, but we do withhold, you'll be checked. If you go to apply for a lease or a housing loan and you apply, then you're going to be checked to see if you have any outstanding fines owing to the court. And that's not an unheard of practice. The province does it all the time. If you don't pay your speeding fines, you don't pay your other things, you're not going to get to renew your license. You know, this is not unheard of. So, you know, there are other ways of enforcement as well, as opposed to hammer and fist.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one more question.
Yeah, that was my question, what you just kind of answered there, like what kind of community buy-in and compliance do you have with the orders that the court, you know, makes? Is it pretty good compliance? And you just explained that you could sanction them by withdrawal of some services, and like, but does the police actually have to go out there and execute orders sometimes?
What are you asking?
Do you want me to talk about that? Sometimes with the police, they are only there to keep the peace. So our compliance officers might attend the situation, the issue, where whatever the order is, and
for example, somebody owns a house and somebody else is renting it and they want them to leave. That's common. You know, where do you go? Usually you go to the province for an eviction order. If it's pretty set that Indian Affairs gave the person and gave the person that certificate of possession, then the compliance officers would attend with the owner and make sure that they change the locks and that things are done. But if there's any confrontation involved, then the police will be there to make sure there's no criminal element happening. As far as the good standing policy, that's probably the thing that we do have. We're not there yet with implementation of somebody to leave their premises because of a dispute among, you know, couples living together. We haven't been to that challenge, but one of the things we did do with it's called our couples property law, which is our matrimonial real property law. What we did do was we were able to pass it according to the rules that the federal government gave us. So the federal government said, I don't care what your law is, I don't care what's in it, but you have to pass it by a 25% threshold. I know that's pretty hard with other First Nations communities, and it certainly was hard with us because we had 12,000 voters, or 10,000, 8,000, as Carl knows, 8,000. We had to receive 1,883 people to vote in this law. We received 2,004 votes. We made the threshold, but the thing we made sure, in order for it to get federal sanction, is that one, we did have the threshold, we met the threshold. We sent the notice to the Ministry of Attorney General, to Indian Affairs, and to the equivalent in Quebec. So we did exactly what that federal piece of legislation told us to do. And on top of that, we said all issues will go to the Akwesasne Court. Canada didn't care, you know, what was in our law, only that we made the threshold and we sent notice to all those relevant parties. We did. So now our issue, our court, our law says it goes to our court, and that has to be respected. We have not come to an implementation or a situation where somebody needs to leave their home because the court ordered someone else to occupy it. We haven't come to that challenge yet, but I'm sure it will in the future. So we just haven't met that. We just haven't met that situation. Okay.
For the courts, like for Ganawag, we have the open courts, we have the outside courts. Is there a mechanism that's in place for you to be collected? How do you do your collection of fines for non-native and natives? Because for us outside, there's no mechanism for us to really collect fines. If they don't pay it, they don't pay it. Our police have to wait for, I've been on the police force sometimes 20 years if fine was outstanding. Is there a mechanism that you can go out and collect those fines instead of just waiting? We can serve them as many subpoenas as we want for the bailiffs. It's a question of are they going to come back and pay it or not. But you're the one about the good standing policy. I really like that. You know, like for our community members, that's something that needs to be placed in our community. And Kevin, we got to work on it.
Actually, Bobby, interesting you should say that. Actually, what we've been doing for as long as I've been with, Kahnawake Justice, is for people who don't reside in the community, whose addresses we have and they haven't paid their speeding tickets or any fines like that, we do have a bailiff service, and he'll go and he'll find them, and he'll wait and he'll bring him to jail if he needs to. So we do recoup a lot more of that money in that way. We have a bailiff who we work with very closely. What's interesting with that, when we're just looking at issues of buy-in and people respect the decisions, sometimes people who aren't from the community don't take the Court of Kahnawake seriously. They say, it's an Indian court, whatever, not going to pay. You say, well, when the bailiff shows up to pick you up, you're going to know how serious we are. So that's how we do a lot of our external collection, and it pays off. Bailiff will go there, he'll wait, he'll track them down, and it's a question of pay up or we're taking you away. People pony up the money pretty fast at that point. So already on it, Bobby.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just one last comment. Our experience is opposite. All of our non-member, non-native people who are fined are the ones that pay up more so, surprisingly. We get those fines more, I think, than we do our own people. That's what I'm finding. Yeah, so, it's funny. But the good standing policy is very effective. Very effective.
Because with Quebec, the way it works, if you've got traffic fines, you pay with X amount of days, you can put sanctions on their limits, whatever fine there is, you have the opportunity to sanction people's permits or license plates. So we've brought that up and asked to see if we can do it in the future. Hopefully it would work because, like I said, being a police officer, we have bins and bins full of warrants that persons that have remained fined are still outstanding. If we were able to do something like that, it would be outstanding to be collected all these because it's going to go right back to our court system or right back to the community itself.
Excellent. Excellent comments.